The industrial cathedral of Shatterdome Moyolan operated like a beating heart of steel and concrete. Overhead cranes swung massive containers across the assembly floor, each one stenciled with biohazard warnings in 5 languages. The air scrubbers howled constantly, a mechanical thunder that never quite drowned out the hydraulic hiss of pressure doors or the warning klaxons that punctuated every shift change. 2 years after the uprising, the facility had transformed from a Jaeger deployment center into something closer to a hazardous materials processing plant. The war might have ended, but the cleanup would take generations. Jake Pentecost stood in the observation gallery above the main floor, watching a robotic arm lower a sealed canister into a quarantine chamber. The thing inside had once been part of a kaiju. Now it was just tissue slowly breaking down into the toxic sludge the K-Science division called Kaiju Blue. Even through triple reinforced glass, even with the ventilation running at maximum capacity, he could feel the weight of it. Not physically. Something else. The kind of pressure that made his jaw ache. Below, technicians in full hazmat gear guided the canister into position. Their movements were methodical, practiced. No wasted motion. Every step rehearsed until it became reflex. This was the reality of victory. Not parades or monuments, but endless containment protocols and exclusion zones that would outlive everyone currently alive. The briefing room door opened behind him. Herman Gotautleb entered datapad already in hand, lab coat somehow still pristine despite the industrial grime that coated everything else in the facility. He pushed his glasses up with one finger and cleared his throat. Instructor Pentecost. Jake didn't turn from the window. Doctor, the presentation begins in 3 minutes. I know. Gotautleb moved to stand beside him, following his gaze to the floor below. For a moment, neither spoke. The machinery continued its work indifferent to human schedules or concerns. How many containers today? Jake asked. 47. Tissue samples from the Sydney exclusion zone. Some of it dates back to the first Kaiju war. Gotautleb's voice carried no inflection, just facts. We estimate another 200 shipments before that sector is clear, assuming no complications. There are always complications. Yes, they stood in silence for another few seconds. Then Gotautleb checked his datapad and turned toward the briefing room. Jake followed. The room was functional. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a long table surrounded by chairs that had seen better decades. A projection screen dominated one wall, currently displaying the PPDC logo and nothing else. Officers and scientists filed in, taking seats without conversation. Everyone looked tired. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. Marshal Kwan entered last, a woman in her 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the expression of someone who had stopped expecting good news. She took her place at the head of the table and gestured to Gotautleb. Doctor, you have the floor. Gotautleb stood connecting his datapad to the projection system. The PPDC logo disappeared, replaced by a schematic of molecular structures that meant nothing to Jake, but seemed to make several scientists lean forward. Project Blue Cut, Gotautleb began. Our objective is simple. Kaiju blue toxicity renders vast areas of our planet uninhabitable. Current containment methods are expensive, slow, and ultimately temporary. The material degrades, yes, but the process releases blood mist, airborne particulates. The exclusion zones expand, even as we attempt to clean them. The schematic changed. Now it showed a map of East Asia dotted with red zones. Too many red zones. Blue Cut proposes a chemical neutralization process. We introduce a catalyst that accelerates molecular breakdown while binding the toxic elements into stable compounds. In laboratory conditions, we have achieved a 94% reduction in toxicity within 6 hours. Marshal Kwan's expression didn't change. Laboratory conditions. Yes, and you want to test it here, on site, with active kaiju tissue. The alternative is to continue current protocols, which will require an estimated 300 years to fully remediate existing contamination, assuming no new Kaiju emergencies. The room absorbed this. 300 years. Multiple lifetimes. Civilizations had risen and fallen in less time. What's the risk profile? This from Commander Hayes, head of tactical operations. He was younger than Jake, which meant he'd probably grown up in the shadow of the war. His generation didn't remember a world without Kaiju. Gotautleb adjusted his glasses. The catalyst is inert until combined with Kaiju tissue. Once activated, it should remain localized to the treatment area. Should, Hayes repeated. We are operating outside established frameworks. Some degree of uncertainty is unavoidable. Marshal Kwan looked at the scientists around the table. Objections? None came. Or perhaps they did, but stayed silent. Jake had seen it before. Exhaustion made optimists of everyone. The promise of a solution, any solution, became too tempting to question properly. Authorization granted, Kwan said. But we start small. One container. Full quarantine protocols. If anything deviates from your projections by more than 5%, we shut it down immediately. Gotautleb nodded. Understood. The meeting dissolved. Officers returned to their duties, scientists to their laboratories. Jake remained in his seat, watching the red zones on the projection screen. Each one represented thousands of square miles rendered toxic. Cities evacuated. Coastlines abandoned. The Kaiju had lost the war, but were still winning the aftermath. He found Gotautleb in the observation gallery again, an hour later. The K-Science team had assembled below, surrounding a single canister in the center of the quarantine chamber. Instruments covered every surface, measuring, recording, analyzing. The air in the gallery carried a different quality now, anticipation perhaps, or dread. Sometimes the distinction didn't matter. Are we ready? Jake asked. As ready as we can be. Below, a technician injected the catalyst. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the instruments began to react. Numbers scrolled across displays. Graphs spiked and settled. The toxic readings inside the chamber dropped. 10%, 20, 40. Gotautleb exhaled slowly. Around them, scientists leaned closer to their monitors, speaking in quick technical bursts. The toxicity continued to fall. 60%, 75, 90. It's working, someone said. Jake watched the numbers. They looked good. Too good, maybe, but he wasn't the scientist. He was just the instructor who trained pilots to climb into giant machines and fight monsters. What did he know about molecular catalysts? The test ran for 6 hours. The readings remained stable. Kaiju blue toxicity reduced by 93.7%. Close enough to the laboratory projections that everyone in the observation gallery allowed themselves to relax, not celebrate. Nobody in the PPDC celebrated anymore. But relax. Breathe a little easier. Marshal Kwan arrived for the final hour. She stood beside Gotautleb, arms crossed, watching the displays with the same neutral expression she brought to every situation. Recommendations? She asked. The catalyst performed within acceptable parameters. I propose we proceed to Phase 2. Multiple containers. Controlled conditions. Timeline. 72 hours for analysis and preparation. Kwan nodded. Make it happen. She left. The scientists began their shutdown procedures, cataloging data, preparing samples for detailed study. Jake remained in the gallery watching technicians in hazmat suits carefully extract the treated material. The container that had held toxic sludge 6 hours ago now held something inert. Harmless. A problem solved. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt nothing. Just the dull ache of fatigue and the vague sense that something had shifted. Not visibly, not measurably, just a feeling irrational and impossible to articulate. Gotautleb appeared beside him again. You seem troubled? You have the expression of a man waiting for bad news. Jake almost smiled. I always have that expression. Fair point. They stood together in the quiet gallery. Below, the last technicians filed out of the quarantine chamber. Lights dimmed. The machinery wound down to standby. Another day in the endless work of cleaning up after monsters. "Get some sleep, Doctor," Jake said. 72 hours goes faster than you think." Gotautleb nodded and left. Jake remained alone now, watching the empty chamber. The instruments still displayed their readings. Toxicity levels stable, everything nominal, nothing to worry about. 8 minutes later, the thermal sensors registered an anomaly. Temperature fluctuation, 0.03 degrees, within normal variation, nothing to worry about. The air quality monitors showed a brief spike. Particulates, microscopic, gone almost immediately. Probably a calibration error, nothing to worry about. Deep in the ventilation system, something moved. Too small for the cameras to register. Too diffuse for the chemical sensors to identify. The catalyst hadn't failed. It had worked exactly as designed. But some things don't die when you kill them. Some things adapt. In the morning, the first maintenance crew would find the corroded ductwork. They would see the way the metal had deteriorated, not rusted, but something else. Something that left microscopic pitting in a pattern that suggested teeth. They would call it stress fracture, metal fatigue, nothing to worry about. By the time anyone understood what had actually happened in the quarantine chamber, it would be far too late to stop it. The catalyst had neutralized the toxin. But in doing so, it had created something new. Something that fed on the very poison it was meant to destroy. Something that learned. In the ventilation ducts and the gaps between pipes in the shadows where sensors couldn't reach, colonies began to form. Microscopic. Patient. Hungry. The countdown had started. Not with an explosion or an alarm, but with a whisper of movement in the dark. The kind of mistake that only becomes visible in retrospect, when the damage is already done and the only question left is how to survive it. Jake Pentecost stood in the observation gallery, staring at readouts that told him everything was fine, and felt the weight of certainty that it wasn't. He had no evidence, no data, just instinct. The same instinct that had kept him alive through battles that should have killed him. Something was wrong. He just didn't know what yet. The machines hummed their mechanical lullaby. The numbers stayed green. The shift change came and went. Moyolan settled into its night cycle, reduced staff, dimmed lights, the eternal vigilance of automated systems watching over toxic cargo that would outlive empires. In the darkness between the sensors, something grew. Something red. Something patient. Something that had all the time in the world to learn how to survive in a facility designed to destroy it. The war had ended 2 years ago. Nobody had told them a new one was starting. Not with an invasion. Not with a portal tearing open in the ocean. But with a whisper in the dark and a failed experiment that had succeeded in ways its creators could never have imagined. By morning, it would be too late. By morning, Destoroyah would have its foothold. And the PPDC, for all its weapons and protocols and hard-won experience, would be fighting something they had created themselves. Fighting the consequences of their own desperation. Fighting the proof that some problems can't be solved. Only survived. If they were lucky, the alarm woke Jake at 0400. Not the general alert, just his personal comm unit vibrating against the metal nightstand. He was awake before the second pulse, already reaching for his boots. Years of training had made sleep a tactical position, something you occupied but never fully committed to. The message was brief. Maintenance crew unresponsive in Sector 7. Hazmat team dispatched. Report to command. He dressed in the dark and was moving through Moyolan's corridors within 3 minutes. The facility operated on a skeleton crew during night hours, just enough personnel to monitor systems and respond to emergencies. The hallways carried an emptiness that felt deliberate, like the building itself was holding its breath. Command was already staffed when he arrived. Not full capacity, but enough bodies at terminals to indicate this wasn't routine. Marshal Kwan stood at the central display, still in her duty uniform despite the hour. She didn't acknowledge Jake's entrance, just kept her attention fixed on the screen, showing Sector 7's layout. "Situation?" Jake asked. Commander Hayes looked up from his terminal. "Maintenance team went dark 40 minutes ago. Last transmission reported structural damage to ventilation ducts. Possible corrosion. They went to investigate and stopped responding. Could be a comm failure. Could be." Hayes didn't sound convinced. "Hazmat is suiting up now, but there's something else." He pulled up a new display. Atmospheric readings from Sector 7. The numbers meant nothing to Jake until Hayes highlighted a specific data set. Particulate matter, airborne. Concentration increasing over the last 6 hours. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. Blood mist. Maybe. The composition doesn't match standard Kaiju blue degradation. It's similar but different. K-Science is analyzing it now. The doors opened. Gotautleb entered looking more disheveled than Jake had ever seen him. His lab coat was buttoned incorrectly and his glasses sat crooked on his face. He carried a tablet and moved directly to Kwan without preamble. "Marshal, we have a problem." "I'm aware, Doctor." "No." Gotautleb's voice carried an edge Jake hadn't heard before. "You're not. The blood mist isn't from stored tissue. It's fresh, active, and it's spreading." The command center went quiet. Fresh meant new breakdown. Active meant biological process. Neither should be possible in a sealed facility with all Kaiju material under containment. Quain's expression never changed. "Explain." Gotautleb pulled up his own data on the main screen. Molecular structures, chemical compositions, the kind of information that would take Jake hours to parse, but that the scientists in the room absorbed in seconds. "The catalyst worked," Gotautleb said. "It neutralized the toxin exactly as designed. But the neutralization process created a byproduct, something we didn't account for in laboratory testing. The byproduct appears to be organic, microscopic, and it metabolizes Kaiju blue." Hayes leaned forward. "Metabolizes? You mean it eats it?" "Functionally, yes. It consumes the toxic compounds and expels them as this." He gestured to the blood mist readings, "which our sensors read as low-level contamination. Not dangerous, not worth an immediate alert, but it's accumulating." "How much?" Kwan asked. "Current concentration is 0.003 parts per million in Sector 7, increasing by 0.001 every 20 minutes. At this rate, the sector will reach hazardous levels within 4 hours." "Seal it." "Already done." "But Marshal, that's not the primary concern. The organism is in the ventilation system. We designed that system to cover the entire facility. Every sector connects." The implication settled over the command center like a physical weight. If the organism could travel through the ducts, could spread through the air circulation, then nowhere in Moyolan was truly isolated. "Containment options," Kwan said. Gotautleb adjusted his glasses. "We can shut down ventilation, but that creates other problems. The facility requires air circulation to prevent toxic buildup from stored materials. We can activate the scrubbers to maximum capacity, but preliminary analysis suggests the organism simply passes through the filters. They weren't designed to catch anything this small. So what do we do?" "We need to understand it first. I'm sending a team to collect samples from Sector 7. Once we know what we're dealing with, we can develop a proper countermeasure." Kwan looked at the display. The red zone marking Sector 7 seemed to pulse with each data update. "You have 6 hours. After that, I'm evacuating the facility and calling in a Level 5 decontamination protocol." Level 5 meant burning it all. Structure and contents. Everything reduced to ash and slag. Decades of research equipment worth billions and a strategic position that couldn't be easily replaced. The nuclear option. Understood, Gotautleb said. Jake watched the K science lead leave, already talking into his comm unit, coordinating his team. 6 hours. It wasn't enough time, but then again it never was. Then again, the Hazmat team deployed at 0530. 4 technicians in full containment suits, the kind that looked more like personal spacecraft than protective gear. Jake watched from the observation gallery as they entered Sector 7 through the emergency airlock. Their helmet cameras fed live video to the command screens. The sector looked wrong, not catastrophically, just subtly off. The walls had a patina Jake couldn't identify. Not rust, not mold. Something else. The ventilation ducts showed signs of deterioration, metal pitted and rough where it should have been smooth. One of the technicians ran a gloved hand along the surface, and the material crumbled like dried coral. Not stress fracture, the tech reported. This is active degradation. Something is breaking down the infrastructure. Collect a sample, Bishamon. Gotautleb's voice came through the comm. Full biosafety protocols. The technician used a sterile scraper to gather material from the duct wall. It came away in flakes, red-brown, and disturbingly organic-looking. He sealed it in a containment vessel and logged the collection. Moving to the maintenance area, another tech said. They found the maintenance crew in a corridor intersection. 3 bodies in standard work uniforms slumped against the wall in positions that suggested they'd sat down to rest and simply never stood up again. No visible injuries, no signs of struggle, just stillness. Vital signs, Hayes asked from command. The tech moved closer, scanner extended. Negative across the board. Time of death, approximately 40 minutes ago. The same time they'd stopped responding. Jake had seen plenty of death. You didn't survive the Kaiju war without becoming familiar with it. But this felt different. There was no violence here. No trauma. Just 3 people who had stopped being alive as if some essential process had simply switched off. "'Cause?" Quan asked. Demat. Unknown. No external wounds, no signs of asphyxiation. They just stopped. Gotautleb's voice cut through. Get them out of there. Full quarantine. I want every test we have. The Hazmat team secured the bodies in containment bags and began the slow process of extraction. Jake watched the helmet camera feeds, looking for something he couldn't name. A sign. A warning. Anything that might explain how 3 healthy adults could die without apparent cause in a facility designed to be one of the safest environments on the planet. One of the cameras caught movement. Brief. In the periphery, a shadow crossing a ventilation grate. Hold, Jake said into the comm. Camera 3, pan left. The technician complied, sweeping the helmet cam across the corridor. Nothing visible? Just empty hallway and damaged infrastructure. What did you see? Hayes asked. Maybe nothing. Trick of the light. But he'd seen it. Just for a second. Something moving in the ductwork. Too fast to be drift, too deliberate to be air current. Something alive. The Hazmat team extracted without further incident. The bodies went to medical. The samples went to K science. The sector remained sealed, blood mist levels continuing their steady climb. Jake found himself in the observation gallery again, staring down at the main floor. Technicians worked in organized chaos, processing the samples, running analysis, searching for answers. Gotautleb moved between workstations, reviewing data, asking questions, looking progressively more troubled with each new result. Talk to me, Doctor, Jake said when Gotautleb finally emerged for air. The scientist removed his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth from his pocket. A nervous habit. The organism is unlike anything we've encountered. It's not kaiju biology. It's not terrestrial. It's something new. Created by the catalyst. Created by our attempt to solve one problem without fully understanding the system we were manipulating. The catalyst broke down kaiju blue at the molecular level. But some molecules didn't just break down. They recombined. formed new structures, and those structures are alive. How do we kill it? Gotautleb put his glasses back on. I don't know yet. Standard sterilization techniques are ineffective. Heat-cold chemical agents, the organism adapts. We expose it to ultraviolet radiation, and it develops a protective layer. We try to poison it, and it metabolizes the poison. It's learning faster than we can develop countermeasures. What about the people, the maintenance crew? What killed them? Oxygen deprivation. The blood mist displaced enough breathable air that they asphyxiated. But it happened gradually. They wouldn't have noticed the symptoms until it was too late. Just increasing fatigue, disorientation, and then unconsciousness. How long until that happens facility-wide? Gotautleb checked his tablet. At current spread rates, 20 hours. Maybe less if the organism accelerates, which it appears to be doing. Jake looked at the sealed doors of Sector 7. Behind that barrier, something was growing, learning, feeding on the very poison that had been humanity's biggest environmental threat for the past 2 decades. Turning a crisis into fuel. We need to contain it, he said. I'm open to suggestions. Fire won't work. The organism survives in the residue. We'd need to incinerate everything down to bare metal, and even then, I'm not certain we'd eliminate all traces. Then we evacuate. Pull everyone out, seal the facility, and figure out the next step from a safe distance. That's Marshal Kwan's current plan. But if we abandon Moyolan, we lose our primary research center. And there's no guarantee the organism stays contained. The ventilation system connects to external exhaust ports. If the blood mist reaches open air, he didn't need to finish. Jake understood. Exclusion zones already covered too much of the planet. Adding another one, this one created not by Kaiju attack, but by human error, would be a different kind of defeat. The comm units throughout the facility activated simultaneously. Kwan's voice, calm and authoritative, filled every corridor and chamber. All personnel, this is Marshal Kwan. Effective immediately. Moyolan is under Level 4 containment protocols. All non-essential staff report to evacuation assembly points. K-Science and command personnel maintain current positions. We have a biological hazard in Sector 7. Remain calm. Follow your training. We will get through this. The announcement ended. Around the facility, people began to move. Not panicking. Not yet. But Jake could see it in their faces when they passed the observation gallery. Fear. The kind that came from knowing the war was supposed to be over, and finding out it had just changed shape. Gotautleb stared at his tablet. 6 hours. I have 6 hours to find a solution. You'll find it, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. And if I don't, then we burn it all and start over. That's simple. It's never simple, Doctor. But sometimes it's necessary. Gotautleb nodded slowly and returned to his work. Jake remained in the gallery watching the evacuation proceed with military efficiency. Families with children moved first, then administrative staff, then technical personnel whose work wasn't immediately critical. The facility that had hummed with constant activity now felt like a ship slowly emptying as it took on water. In Sector 7, behind sealed doors and emergency barriers, the blood mist continued to spread. The organism continued to grow. And somewhere in the damaged ductwork, something red and hungry continued to learn what it meant to be alive in a world that wanted it dead. Jake checked his watch. 5 hours and 40 minutes until Level 5 decontamination. 5 hours and 40 minutes to find a miracle. He'd seen longer odds. Not many, but some. The question wasn't whether they could survive this. The question was what they'd have to sacrifice to do it. And whether that sacrifice would even matter in the end. The holding facility occupied a sub-level of Moyolan that most personnel didn't know existed. Reinforced walls, biometric locks, guards who checked credentials 3 times before allowing passage. The kind of security reserved for things too dangerous to release, but too valuable to eliminate. Jake had been down here once before, shortly after taking the instructor position. Marshal Quan had wanted him to understand what they were protecting against. Or protecting. The distinction remained unclear. Newton Geiszler sat behind a transparent barrier that could withstand a Kaiju's tail strike. The room beyond held a single chair, a table, and monitoring equipment that tracked everything from heart rate to neural activity. No windows, no decorations. Just the clinical emptiness of a space designed to contain a threat. Newt looked smaller than Jake remembered. The years since the uprising had carved something out of him. He still wore the thick framed glasses, still had the nervous energy that manifested as constant small movements. But his face carried a weariness that went deeper than lack of sleep. The kind that came from knowing you'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Gotautleb stood outside the barrier with Jake datapad in hand, expression carefully neutral. Whatever history existed between these two men, whatever friendship or rivalry or complicated middle ground they'd occupied, it had been replaced by something more utilitarian. Need without trust. He hasn't been briefed, Gotautleb said quietly. Marshal Quan's orders. She wants his initial reaction uncontaminated by our assumptions. You think he'll know something? He drifted with a Kaiju brain, multiple times. The precursors used him as a bridge to hijack our technology. If anyone would recognize an anomaly in Kaiju biology, it would be Newton. The use of the full name instead of Newt told Jake everything about how far that relationship had deteriorated. A guard opened the access door. Gotautleb entered first, Jake following. The barrier sealed behind them with a hydraulic hiss that sounded too much like finality. Newt looked up. His eyes went to Gotautleb first, then Jake, and something that might have been a smile flickered across his face before disappearing. Herman, been a while. 15 months, 2 weeks. You counting? The PPDC requires precise records. Newt's attention shifted to Jake. And you brought muscle. This a social call, or am I getting transferred to somewhere worse? Didn't know there was anywhere worse. Jake pulled out a chair and sat. Gotautleb remained standing, tablet held like a shield. We have a situation, Jake said. Dr. Gotautleb believes you might have insight. Dr. Gotautleb always believes I have insight. Usually right before everything goes to hell. Newt leaned back, chains attached to his wrists, rattling slightly. The restraints were ceremonial more than functional. If he wanted to hurt someone, the real security was the neural limiter implanted at the base of his skull. What kind of situation? Gotautleb pulled up an image on his tablet and turned it toward Newt. Microscopic photography. The organism from Sector 7 magnified until its structure became visible. Red-brown cellular matter arranged in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Newt stared at it for 3 full seconds without speaking. His expression cycled through confusion, recognition, and something darker that Jake couldn't identify. Where did you get this? We created it, Gotautleb said. Accidentally, during an attempt to neutralize Kaiju Blue. You tried to neutralize Kaiju Blue. Newt's voice carried disbelief. Why would you do that? Because it's poisoning the planet. It's supposed to poison the planet. That's the whole point. The precursors terraformed their last world to death. And they were looking for a new one. The Kaiju weren't invasion. They were preparation. The toxicity wasn't a side effect. It was the goal. Jake felt cold certainty settle into his bones. You're saying the precursors wanted Earth toxic. Toxic to us, perfect for them. Newt pointed at the image on Gotautleb's tablet. And you just gave them exactly what they wanted, a catalyst, something that accelerates the process. That's not possible, Gotautleb said. The breach is closed. The precursors have no access to Earth. You sure about that? The question hung in the air. Gotautleb's face had gone carefully blank, the expression of a man confronting a variable he hadn't accounted for. Explain, Jake said. Newt leaned forward, chains rattling. When I drifted with the Kaiju brain, I saw things. Felt things. The precursors don't think like us. They don't operate on our timelines. They plan in centuries. They plant seeds and wait. The drones, the brains we kept in storage, the tissue samples scattered across every research facility on the planet. You think that was all inert dead? We ran extensive tests, Gotautleb said. Everything was neutralized. You ran tests based on human biology, human assumptions. But Kaiju biology doesn't work that way. It's designed to persist, to adapt, to survive conditions that would sterilize anything else. Newt gestured at the tablet again. This thing you made, it's not random. Look at the cellular structure, the way it's organized. Gotautleb looked. Jake couldn't read the microscopic image, but he watched the scientist's face pale slightly. Colony formation, Gotautleb said quietly. Not just colony, hive. That's Kaiju architecture. Precursor design language. You didn't create something new, Herman. You activated something old, something that was waiting. The room felt smaller suddenly. Jake thought about the ventilation system, the way the organism had spread through it like water finding cracks. The maintenance crew dead without violence. The blood mist accumulating in sealed sectors. How do we stop it? He asked. Newt laughed, sharp and bitter. Stop it! You can't stop it! That's what the precursors do. They design life that can't be stopped, only contained, maybe. Then how do we contain it? I don't know. I'd need to see the actual organism. Study it. Understand its life cycle. Newt looked at Gotautleb. But I'm guessing that's not why you're here. You want me to tell you something useful without giving me access to anything that matters. Same dance, different song. Gottleb's jaw tightened. You betrayed us once. Forgive us for being cautious. I didn't betray anyone. I was compromised. There's a difference. The result was the same. Yeah, it was. Newt's voice went quieter. And I get to live with that every day, in this concrete box, while you all pretend the war is over. But it's not over, Herman. It's just changing shape. And now you've made it worse. Jake stood. We're evacuating the facility, sealing it. But if the organism can spread, if it can reach open air, we need to know what we're dealing with. Newt studied him. You want me to predict it? Based on half a photograph and your word that it came from a catalyst experiment. Yes, and if I'm wrong, people die either way. At least this way, some of them might live. The bluntness seemed to reach Newt in a way politeness wouldn't. He looked at the image again longer this time, and Jake watched his eyes track patterns invisible to anyone who hadn't spent years studying Kaiju biology. It'll cluster, Newt said finally. Kaiju tissue always clusters. Individual cells are weak. But together they form aggregate structures. Stronger, smarter. This thing, if it's following precursor design, it'll gather mass. Look for energy sources. Chemical, thermal, anything it can metabolize. The facility has a nuclear reactor, Jake said. Then that's where it is heading. And when it gets there, when it absorbs that much energy, it'll transform. Precursor life is designed to evolve rapidly, adapt to threats. You hit it with cold, it develops heat resistance. You hit it with heat, it learns to absorb it. The more you fight it, the stronger it gets. Gotautleb was typing rapidly on his tablet. The reactor is in sub-level 3. We'd need to shut it down, but that would cut power to the containment systems for all stored Kaiju material. So you're trapped, Newt said. Keep the power on and feed the organism, or shut it down and risk contamination from everything you've got in storage. Classic precursor trap. They think in systems, designed for stalemate. Jake pulled out his comm unit and connected to command frequency. Marshal Kwan. We have a problem. Her voice came back immediately. Another one. The organism is heading for the reactor. We need to relocate all essential personnel and prepare for a hard shutdown. That will take hours. We don't have hours. Silence on the line. Jake could imagine Quan running calculations, weighing options, looking for a choice that didn't result in catastrophe. Such choices rarely existed. "Confirmed," she said finally. "Commander Hayes is initiating emergency protocols. All personnel to evacuation points. We go dark in 90 minutes. The comm went silent. Jake looked at Newt, who had been listening to the entire exchange. "You're making a mistake," Newt said. "What should we do instead?" "I don't know. But shutting down the reactor won't stop it. It'll just slow it down. And slow isn't the same as stopped." Gotautleb moved closer to the barrier. "If we relocate you to a research station outside the facility, could you develop a countermeasure? Maybe. Probably not. These things don't have countermeasures. They have thresholds. Points where the cost of containment exceeds the value of trying. That's what the exclusion zones are. Places where we decided stopping was worse than abandoning." "Not acceptable," Jake said. "Acceptability isn't the issue. Reality is." A klaxon began to sound. 3 short bursts. The evacuation signal. Throughout Moyolan, people would be moving to designated assembly points, gathering belongings, leaving behind years of work because staying meant dying. Jake stood. "We're bringing you upstairs. You'll work with Dr. Gotautleb's team, under guard, under observation. But you'll have access to the samples." "Jake," Gotautleb said quietly, warning in his voice. "We're out of options, Doctor, and time." Jake looked at Newt through the barrier. "You said you were compromised, not a traitor. Prove it." Something shifted in Newt's expression. Not quite hope, but perhaps its distant relative. The acknowledgement that being useful might be the closest thing to redemption available. "I'll need full access to your equipment, all the data. Everything you know about the catalyst composition. You'll have it, and when this is over, when we've contained this thing or failed to contain it, I want a window. In my cell. Just one window." Jake looked at Gotautleb, who nodded fractionally. "Done," Jake said. The guards entered to remove Newt's restraints and fit him with a monitoring collar. Standard protocol for high-risk assets. He stood slowly, joint stiff from too much sitting, and followed them toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back. "Herman, I'm sorry for all of it." Gotautleb's face remained neutral. "Save the apologies. Just find a solution." "Yeah, sure." Newt's smile was small and sad. Because that worked out so well last time. They left the holding facility and ascended to the main levels. The corridors were emptier now, evacuation in full swing. The klaxons had stopped, but the silence felt worse. The absence of sound where there should be life. Jake's comm unit activated. Hayes' voice clipped and urgent. "Pentecost, we have movement in sub-level 2, multiple signatures. Heading toward the reactor access corridor." "How many?" "Hard to say. The sensors are reading it as one mass, but it's spreading, taking up more space, like it's growing." Jake looked at Newt. "How long until it reaches the reactor?" "Depends on its size, its speed. Could be minutes, could be hours. Best guess, 30 minutes, maybe less." They started moving faster. The reactor level was restricted access, but Jake's credentials overrode the locks. The descent felt endless, each sub-level bringing them deeper into Moyolan's foundation, closer to the beating heart that powered everything. The access corridor was empty. Emergency lighting cast red shadows that made everything look like the inside of an infected wound. The temperature had risen, not dramatically but enough to notice. The air tasted metallic. Gotautleb checked his tablet. Thermal readings are elevated. Chemical composition shows increased particulate density. The blood mist is here. Ahead, the corridor split. Left went to the reactor control room. Right to the primary cooling systems. Both routes showed the same red emergency lighting. "We need to split up," Jake said. "Dr. Gotautleb, take Newt to control. Shut down the reactor properly. I'll check the cooling systems. Alone." "I've done worse." Gotautleb looked like he wanted to argue, but recognized futility when he saw it. 15 minutes. Then we evacuate regardless." "Agreed." They separated. Jake moved right down a corridor that seemed to narrow with each step. The walls here showed the same patina he'd seen in Sector 7. Not rust. Something biological. The facility was being digested from the inside. He found the first colony at the cooling junction. Not large. Maybe the size of a car tire. Red and glistening, and somehow too organized to be random growth. It clung to the pipes like a parasite tendrils extending into the metal itself. Jake pulled out his comm unit and activated the camera function. Gotautleb would want documentation, evidence, proof that they'd tried to understand before resorting to more permanent solutions. The colony pulsed, a slow rhythm almost like breathing. And as Jake watched, part of it detached. A smaller piece, maybe the size of his fist, dropped to the floor and began moving toward him. Not rolling, not sliding, moving. With intention. Jake stepped back. The piece accelerated. He drew his sidearm, a plasma pistol that could punch through Kaiju hide, and fired. The shot hit dead center. The piece exploded in a spray of red mist that dissipated almost immediately. But the larger colony had noticed. More pieces were detaching. Dozens. Moving faster now, coordinating their approach like ants responding to a threat. Jake ran. Behind him, the sound of movement multiplied. Not footsteps. Something else. The scrape of organic matter against metal. The whisper of growth happening too fast to be natural. He reached the junction where he'd split from Gotautleb and Newt. The corridor back to the surface was clear. So far. But how long before the organism reached the upper levels? How long before evacuation became impossible? His comm unit activated. Gotautleb's voice tight with control. Jake, the reactor is offline, but we have a problem. What kind? The organism isn't stopping. It's still moving toward the reactor chamber. Like it knows the residual heat is there. We can see it on the monitors. It's massing, combining, growing larger. Jake thought about Newt's words. Aggregate structures, stronger, smarter. The more you fight it, the stronger it gets. Get out, he said, now. But, that's an order, Doctor. Grab Newt and get to the surface. We're burning this place. Jake, if we activate level 5 while we're still inside, then we better move fast. He started running toward control, toward the two scientists who represented humanity's best chance of understanding what they'd created. The corridor seemed to stretch infinitely. Each meter gained feeling like miles. He found them at the control room entrance. Newt was staring at a monitor showing the reactor chamber. On screen, the organism had formed a mass the size of a small vehicle. Red and glistening and undeniably alive. As they watched it, began to change shape. Compacting, reorganizing, taking on definition that suggested structure, purpose. It's building something, Newt said quietly. A carapace, like armor. Can it survive level 5 decontamination? Jake asked. I don't know, maybe. Precursor life is designed to survive everything. Then we're about to find out. Jake pulled both men away from the monitor and pushed them toward the exit. Behind them, in the depths of Moyolan's foundation, something new was being born. Something that had waited in microscopic patience for the perfect conditions to emerge. The war hadn't ended. It had just been dormant. And humanity, in its desperate attempt to clean up the aftermath, had given it exactly what it needed to begin again. They ran. They reached the surface with minutes to spare. Emergency protocols had transformed Moyolan into a ghost town. The massive hangar that usually thrummed with activity stood empty, except for a single Jaeger unit being prepped for deployment. Titan Redeemer. A Mark VI heavy assault model loomed against the far wall like a sleeping giant being roused too early. It was the only unit still inside Moyolan. The rest had already staged to the perimeter when evacuation protocols began. Marshal Kwan stood at the command platform, surrounded by skeleton crew personnel coordinating the final evacuation. She looked up as Jake Gotautleb and Newt emerged from the access elevator. "Status," she asked. "Reactor offline," Gotautleb reported. "But the organism has formed an aggregate structure. Size and capabilities unknown. How long until level 5 is viable?" "Personnel evacuation is 97% complete. We can initiate in 20 minutes, Quan nodded. Her attention shifted to Newt, registering his presence with a flicker of something that might have been disapproval. "Dr. Geiszler, I hope this faith is warranted. Makes 2 of us, Marshal." The building shuddered. Not violently, but enough to feel, like something massive had shifted deep below. The lights flickered. Backup generators kicked in immediately, but the momentary darkness felt like a warning. Commander Hayes pulled up a schematic on the main display. "We're reading structural stress in sub-level 3. Multiple support columns showing integrity loss. Whatever's down there, it's compromising the foundation." "How long until collapse?" Quan asked. "Unknown. Could be hours, could be minutes." Another tremor. Stronger this time. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin streams. The Jaeger's scaffolding groaned under the strain. "We can't wait," Jake said. "That thing is coming up." Quan looked at the display showing evacuation progress. 3% remaining. Somewhere in Moyolan, a few dozen people were still gathering equipment, securing data, making the difficult choices about what to save and what to abandon. "Alert all remaining personnel," she said. "Emergency extraction. Leave everything. Get to the perimeter." Hayes transmitted the order. On the display, the few remaining dots representing active comm signals began moving toward the exterior, fast. Everyone understood what the tremors meant. Gotautleb was studying his tablet, pulling data from the facility's failing sensor network. The mass is ascending, following the reactor access shaft. It's choosing the most direct route to the surface. "Why?" Jake asked. "If it wanted to escape, there are easier paths." Newt moved closer to Gotautleb's screen, studying the data. "It's not trying to escape. It's hunting. Look at the pattern. It's following thermal signatures. Body heat. It knows we're up here." The words settled like a physical weight. Hunting implied intention. Strategy. This wasn't a leak or a contamination event. It was a predator tracking prey. "Pilot Titan Redeemer," Quan ordered. "Get ready for contact." 2 figures in pilot suits emerged from the prep area. Jake recognized them. Chen and Rodriguez, experienced rangers who'd survived multiple Kaiju engagements. They moved with the efficient calm of people who'd learned to function while terrified. "Marshal," Chen said, "what's the situation?" "Unknown hostile emerging from sublevel. Biological. Estimated size indeterminate. Rules of engagement: contain, do not kill. We need to understand what we're dealing with." Rodriguez glanced at Jake. They'd trained together. She knew him well enough to read the concern he wasn't voicing. "Sir." "It's fast," he said, "and it learns. Don't give it the same attack twice." They nodded and moved toward the con pod. The Jaeger activation sequence began massive hydraulics engaging as Titan Redeemer straightened from its storage position. The sound was thunder made mechanical power, given physical form. The tremors had become continuous now, small earthquakes radiating from below. On the display, the sensor readings showed the mass reaching sub-level 1, less than 100 meters below the hangar floor. "All personnel to minimum safe distance," Quan announced. "Prepare for breach." The remaining command staff moved to the reinforced observation bunker. Jake stayed on the hangar floor close enough to act if needed, far enough to avoid being immediately crushed if things went wrong. Gotautleb and Newt flanked him, both scientists unable to resist watching their creation emerge into reality. The floor buckled. Not where they'd expected at the reactor access point, but near the eastern wall. Concrete cracked and heaved upward as something pushed from below. Metal screamed. Support structures bent, and then with a sound like tearing fabric amplified 1,000 times, the floor split open. What emerged wasn't what any of them had been prepared for. The aggregate had formed itself into something with shape. Not random growth anymore, but deliberate construction. It stood roughly 3 meters tall, supported by multiple limbs that seemed to shift and reconfigure as it moved. The carapace Newt had mentioned covered its core red-brown and segmented like insect armor. No eyes visible, no obvious sensory organs. But it moved with certainty, as if it could see everything perfectly well. Protoform, Newt breathed. It's already individuated. That shouldn't be possible this fast. The creature turned toward them, or appeared to. Without visible eyes, it was hard to tell. But the attention was unmistakable. It had found what it was hunting. Titan Redeemer stepped forward, each footfall a small earthquake. The Jaeger's hand came up, plasma cannon charging with a rising whine that Jake felt in his teeth. Target acquired, Chen's voice came through the speakers. Requesting confirmation for engagement. Controlled discharge only, Quan ordered. Low yield. We need it intact. The plasma cannon fired at reduced power. The bolt hit center mass. The protoform staggered, armor cracking under the impact. Chunks of carapace fell away, revealing the wet tissue beneath. For a moment it seemed vulnerable, hurt. Then it straightened. The damaged sections didn't heal. Instead, the exposed tissue secreted something, a resinous coating that hardened on contact with air. Within seconds, a thin glaze covered the wounds. Not regeneration, adaptation. The material looked denser than the original armor formed from the residue of the plasma impact itself. It adapted, Gotautleb said. Already. One shot and it developed resistance. The protoform moved. Fast. Faster than something that size should be able to. It closed the distance to Titan Redeemer in 3 bounds and latched onto the Jaeger's leg. The pilots tried to shake it off, but the creature held firm. Then it began to spray something from vents along its carapace. Micro-oxygen. The signature weapon of its genetic ancestor. But refined, concentrated. The spray hit the Jaeger's knee joint, and the metal started to corrode. Not rust. Actual dissolution at the molecular level. The alloy that could withstand direct Kaiju strikes began to pit and weaken. Joint integrity dropping, Rodriguez reported. 40%, 35. It's eating through the armor. Chen fired the plasma cannon point blank. The protoform was thrown clear, tumbling across the hangar floor. It hit a support pillar hard enough to crack concrete. Didn't get up immediately. Didn't move. Status, Quan asked. Target down, Chen said. But we've got major damage to the left knee actuator. Mobility reduced by 40%. On the floor, the protoform began to move again. Not getting up. Changing. Its shape flowed like liquid mass, redistributing limbs, retracting and reforming. When it finished, it was larger. Bulkier. The carapace had thickened further. It's learning from the hits, Jake said. Every time we damage it, it comes back stronger. Then we stop damaging it, Newt said. We contain it, freeze it, lock it down before it can adapt. Gotautleb was already working his tablet. We'd need cryo equipment, industrial scale. We don't have that here. The cooling systems from the reactor, Jake said. Can we repurpose them? Possibly, but it would take time to. The protoform attacked again. This time, it went for Titan Redeemer's damaged leg, targeting the weakness it had created. Intelligence, strategy. Not just animal instinct, but tactical thinking. The Jaeger tried to step back, but the damaged joint couldn't support the full movement. Rodriguez compensated, shifting weight to the other leg, but it left them off balance. The protoform used the opening to climb, scaling the Jaeger's torso with disturbing agility. Get it off, Chen said, voice tight with controlled panic. Get it! The creature found the con pod. Started spraying the armored housing. The metal began to corrode faster this time. It had learned the composition, knew how to break it down more efficiently. Titan Redeemer's fist came up trying to grab the protoform, but the angle was wrong. Like trying to swat a mosquito on your own shoulder, The creature clung to the housing, methodically eating through layer after layer of protection. Jake was moving before he'd consciously decided to. He grabbed a portable heat cell from the emergency equipment rack, the kind used for emergency power when main systems failed. The proto-form was hunting thermal signatures. Newt had said so. Give it a bigger signature to chase. He activated the cell and threw it across the hangar floor away from the Jaeger. The unit sparked and began radiating heat, its coils glowing orange. The proto-form's attention shifted immediately, away from the con pod. Toward the heat source, it dropped from the Jaeger and moved toward the cell with disturbing focus. Titan Redeemer's foot came down where the proto-form had been a second before. Not fast enough. The creature had already moved, circling back, looking for another angle of attack. But now the Jaeger was between it and Jake. "We need backup," Chen said. "This thing is too fast." "Negative, Containment," Quan responded. "All other units are at the perimeter. You're alone. Then we need a new strategy." Jake got to his feet, rifle still ready. The proto-form had stopped circling. It stood in the center of the hangar carapace, gleaming in the emergency lighting, and seemed to be considering its options. Learning, adapting, becoming something more efficient with every passing second. "It's testing us," Newt said over the comm. "Learning our response patterns. Every move we make teaches it how to counter." "So what do we do?" Rodriguez asked. "Nothing. Don't engage. Don't give it more data." But standing still wasn't an option. The proto-form was between Titan Redeemer and the exit, between the Jaeger and the evacuation route. It had chosen its position deliberately, blocking escape, controlling the space. Then it moved again, not toward the Jaeger, toward the eastern wall, toward the structural damage it had caused emerging from below. It lowered its mass against the weakened section and pushed. The wall groaned. Metal supports bent. Concrete cracked further. "It's trying to collapse the building," Gotautleb said. "If that wall fails, the entire hangar comes down." Quan's voice cut through. "All personnel evacuate immediately. Titan Redeemer disengage and fall back." But the proto-form wasn't giving them the option. It pushed harder, and another section of wall gave way. The hangar tilted slightly, just a few degrees, but enough to destabilize everything. Equipment slid. Scaffolding collapsed. The Jaeger stumbled, trying to maintain balance on a surface that was no longer level. Jake ran for the exit. Behind him, the sound of destruction was continuous. Metal tearing, concrete pulverizing. The death rattle of a building that had stood for decades, finally giving up its structural integrity. He made it through the blast doors with seconds to spare. They sealed behind him with hydraulic finality. Through the reinforced window, he could see Titan Redeemer struggling to extract itself from the collapsing hangar. The proto-form had disappeared into the chaos, either crushed or escaped. No way to know. Gotautleb and Newt were already at the perimeter, surrounded by evacuated personnel and emergency vehicles. The entire facility shook as the hangar collapsed inward, creating a crater that swallowed everything that hadn't made it out. "Status of Titan Redeemer," Quan demanded. Hayes checked his displays. "Con pod integrity maintained. Pilots are alive, but the Jaeger is buried. We'd need heavy equipment to extract it." "Do we have visual on the target?" "Negative on direct visual. But," Hayes pulled up thermal imaging, "we're getting residual heat signatures, trail leading from the collapse point toward the storm drainage system. It's faint, dissipating. But it was moving deliberately." "Confirm, the organism escaped." "Affirmative. It used the collapse as cover. By the time we registered the thermal trail, it was already in the subsurface infrastructure." Jake knew which option was more likely. He'd seen the way it moved the intelligence behind its actions. It wasn't dead. It was regrouping, learning, preparing for the next engagement. Marshal Quan stood at the perimeter command post, watching her facility die. 2 decades of research. Billions in equipment. the strategic center of PPDC operations in East Asia. All gone in less than an hour. Level 5 containment protocol, she said. Her voice carried no emotion, just acceptance. Seal and sterilize. The order went out. Industrial units moved into position around the perimeter. Thermobaric charges designed for controlled collapse. Chemical foam to smother and bind. The plan was surgical, not apocalyptic. Entomb the threat. Deny it oxygen and fuel. Let it suffocate in its own prison of rubble and sealant. Jake watched the heavy equipment move into position. Massive vehicles carrying foam tanks and demolition charges. Around him, exhausted personnel tried to process what had just happened and how a routine experiment had become a catastrophe. How they'd created something that had beaten them, not through overwhelming force, but through simple superiority of design. Newt was staring at the collapsed hangar expression, unreadable, behind his glasses. It let us go. What? Jake said. The protoform. It could have pursued, could have followed us out. But it stopped at the wall. It wasn't trying to escape. It was making a statement. What statement? That it could have killed us, all of us, but chose not to. Newt looked at Jake. That's not animal behavior. That's deliberate. It wanted us to know we were outmatched. Wanted us to feel it. That's psychological warfare. Gotautleb had gone pale. That shouldn't be possible at this stage of development. That level of cognition takes time to evolve. Unless it didn't evolve, Newt said. Unless it was designed. By something that's had millions of years to perfect the art of creating the perfect weapon. The first bomber reached its target. The payload fell like a meteor, and the night turned to day. The explosion was visible for kilometers, a pillar of fire that consumed everything it touched. More bombers followed. More payloads. The systematic destruction of everything Moyolan had been. Jake pulled out his comm unit. Marshal, we need to talk. Make it fast, Pentecost. That thing in there? It's not contained. It's not even hurt. We just gave it exactly what Newt said the precursors wanted. We showed it our capabilities, let it study our tactics. And then we burned our own facility while it watched and learned. Silence on the line. Then Kwan's voice, carefully controlled. What are you suggesting? That level 5 isn't enough. That thing is still alive down there, and when it comes out, it'll be ready for everything we just threw at it. Then what do we do? Jake looked at the industrial containment units surrounding what remained of Moyolan. At the assembled personnel who'd lost their workplace and their purpose in a single afternoon. At Newt and Gotautleb, the scientists who'd accidentally created humanity's newest nightmare. We stop reacting, he said. We start hunting, before it finishes learning how to hunt us. The demolition charges detonated in sequence through the night. Controlled collapses, structural entombment, chemical foam flooded the subsurface levels, expanding to fill every void, every tunnel, every possible escape route. By morning, nothing remained of Shatterdome Moyolan, except a sealed mound of rubble and the bitter knowledge that they'd lost the first engagement. Not through weakness, not through lack of preparation, but because they'd been fighting something that was designed to be unbeatable. And somewhere in the storm drains beyond the perimeter, something red and patient had already found new territory to claim. The temporary command center occupied a reinforced bunker 3 kilometers from what used to be Moyolan. Prefabricated walls, portable generators, the kind of setup designed to be assembled in hours and abandoned just as quickly. Every surface carried the smell of fresh paint and desperation. Jake stood in front of a map showing the coastal industrial zone. Red markers indicated confirmed blood mist presence. Yellow marked suspected contamination. The colors were spreading like a disease, each update bringing the threat closer to civilian population centers. 72 hours since the protoform had escaped into the storm drains. 72 hours of tracking, analyzing, and watching it move through subsurface infrastructure with disturbing purpose. It wasn't hiding. It was hunting. Learning the territory. Preparing. Marshal Quan entered, followed by Commander Hayes and a woman Jake didn't recognize. Late 30s compact build, the bearing of someone who'd spent their life in combat zones. She wore a pilot's jacket with fresh insignia. Transfer assignment. "This is Captain Reyes," Quan said. "She's taking command of our cadet training unit. 12 pilots, Mark 4 trainers. They were scheduled for deployment exercises next week." Jake understood immediately. "You're moving up the timeline. We don't have a choice. Every Jaeger we can field needs to be operational. That includes the training units. They're not ready. Nobody's ready, Pentecost. We're fighting something that learns faster than we can adapt. The cadets have completed basic neural handshake protocols. They can pilot. That has to be enough." Reyes spoke for the first time. "With respect, Marshal, my pilots haven't faced real combat. Simulations don't prepare you for drift trauma. Then they'll learn fast, or they won't survive." Quan's voice carried no apology, just the mathematics of necessity. "The protoform is moving toward the port district. Population density 40,000. If we don't establish a containment perimeter, those people are dead." The map updated. New data from reconnaissance drones. The red zone had expanded overnight, consuming another 3 blocks of industrial waterfront. Chemical plants, fuel depots, the kind of infrastructure that became weapons if the wrong thing got inside. "What's the tactical assessment?" Jake asked. Hayes pulled up drone footage on the main display. "The organism has continued to grow. Current estimates put it at 6 meters, maybe 7. Still smaller than a standard kaiju, but it's not behaving like one. It's avoiding direct confrontation, hitting infrastructure targets, water treatment, power substations. It's dismantling our support systems, starving us out," Gotautleb said from his workstation in the corner. He'd been there since they'd established the command center, running analysis on tissue samples recovered from Moyolan before the collapse. Classic siege tactics. Deny resources. Force us to engage on terrain it's already mapped. Newt sat beside him, similarly focused on his screen. The 2 scientists worked in proximity, but not collaboration, sharing data, but no conversation. Professional divorce. "Can we predict its next target?" Quan asked. Gotautleb adjusted his glasses. "Based on current movement patterns, it's heading toward the port fuel depot. 3 million liters of refined petroleum. If it reaches that facility, the resulting fire will be visible from space. So we stop it before it gets there, with what Titan Redeemer is still buried. The nearest heavy units are 8 hours out. All we have are the training Jaegers and whatever support equipment we can requisition from civilian contractors." Quan looked at Jake. "Can your cadets hold a perimeter?" The question had teeth. Jake thought about the 12 pilots waiting in the deployment bay. Young faces. Too young, most of them. They'd grown up watching footage of the Kaiju war, believing they'd missed their chance to be heroes. Now they were getting exactly what they'd wished for, and none of them understood what that actually meant. "They can try," he said. "That's not confidence. Confidence doesn't matter. Readiness does. And they're not ready for this. Then make them ready. You have 6 hours." She left. Hayes followed, already coordinating logistics. Reyes remained studying Jake with an expression that suggested she was running her own calculations about acceptable losses. "You think they'll break?" she said. "Not a question. I think they'll face something that's designed to break them. And I think some of them won't make it back intact. But you'll send them anyway." "I'll lead them. There's a difference." Reyes nodded slowly. "I was at Seattle during the uprising. I know what it looks like when things go wrong in a Jaeger. When the drift carries more than you can handle. Then you know why I want them to stay here, but you also know why they can't." Jake didn't answer. The math was simple and brutal. 12 training Jaegers with inexperienced pilots versus one highly adaptive organism. The cadets would lose. But losing slowly buying time for evacuation and heavy reinforcements was still a form of winning. He found the cadets in the deployment bay. They stood in small clusters near their assigned Jaegers, performing pre-flight checks with the nervous energy of people who knew something was coming, but not what. The machines around them were Mark IV's older models, pulled from storage and retrofitted for training purposes. Solid, reliable, but lacking the advanced weapon systems and armor of modern combat units. They went quiet when Jake entered. 12 faces turning toward him, looking for answers or reassurance, or whatever it was young soldiers always looked for before their first real engagement. "Listen up," Jake said. "You're being deployed. Combat conditions, unknown, hostile. Your objective is to establish and hold a containment perimeter around the port fuel depot. You will not engage the target directly. You will maintain position and report its movements. Support units will handle elimination." Silence. Then a hand went up. Cadet Morrison, 22 from New Zealand. She'd scored highest in simulation combat. "Sir, what kind of hostile are we containing?" "Biological, fast, adaptive. It learns from engagement. Do not give it the same tactic twice. Do not assume your weapons will work the way they did in simulations. It will surprise you when it does fall back to secondary positions and report." Another cadet, Chen's younger brother, looked like he wanted to ask a question but couldn't figure out how to phrase it. The fear was visible. Good. Fear kept you sharp. Overconfidence got you killed. "You've trained for this," Jake continued. "Not this exact scenario, but the principles remain the same. Maintain drift cohesion. Trust your co-pilot. Follow orders. If something goes wrong, if you can't handle what you're seeing, there's no shame in ejecting. Dead heroes don't win wars. Survivors do." He let that sink in. Then gestured to Reyes, who moved forward with tactical assignments. Each cadet pair received their position coordinates, communication frequencies, rules of engagement. The mechanics of warfare reduced to data points and waypoints. Jake found Morrison after the briefing. She was checking her pilot suit seals with mechanical precision, the kind of repeated motion that suggested that she was trying not to think too hard about what came next. "You're on point position," he said. "First line of contact if the organism breaks through the outer perimeter." "Yes, sir." "That scares you." "Yes, sir." "Good. Use it. Scared pilots pay attention. Confident ones miss details." He paused. "What's your co-pilot's name?" "Santos. He's from Brazil. Good synchronization scores." "You trust him." "I trust the numbers." "The numbers don't mean anything when the drift shows you something you can't process. Trust the person. The connection. That's what keeps you alive." Morrison nodded, but Jake could see the doubt. Trust took time to build, and time was the one resource they didn't have. He moved through the rest of the cadets, offering what guidance he could, knowing it wouldn't be enough. 2 hours before deployment, Gotautleb requested his presence in the analysis lab. Jake found both scientists bent over a holographic display showing molecular structures that looked like abstract art. "We've identified something," Gotautleb said without preamble. "The organism's carapace contains trace elements that shouldn't be there. Metals, alloys, materials found in Jaeger construction. It's eating our machines," Newt added. "Not just for energy. It's incorporating the materials into its own structure. Building armor from our armor." Jake stared at the display. "How much stronger does that make it?" "Unknown. But we've calculated stress tolerances based on the metal composition. It's developing resistance to kinetic impacts. Plasma weapons will still be effective, but conventional strikes are becoming less viable with each iteration." "What about temperature extremes?" Gotautleb pulled up another data set. "Interesting you should ask. The organism shows vulnerability to rapid temperature changes. Not sustained heat or cold, but shock transitions. The molecular bonds in its structure can't adapt quickly enough to handle sudden shifts. Cryo-weapons? Potentially, but we'd need industrial-scale equipment. The kind that takes days to manufacture and deploy. We don't have days. No, we don't. Jake looked at the hologram, watching the molecular structure rotate slowly. Somewhere in that abstract pattern was a weakness. A threshold where the organism's adaptive capabilities failed. They just had to find it before it found theirs. The deployment occurred at dusk. 12 training Jaegers moving through the port district in formation, their footfalls synchronized, creating a rhythm that felt almost ceremonial. Jake watched from the mobile command unit, monitoring neural handshake stability across all pilots. The numbers looked good. Drift compatibility averaged 83%, well above minimum operational thresholds. But numbers didn't account for psychological stress. For what happened when pilots saw something their training hadn't prepared them for. All units, this is command. Quan's voice came through the comms. Establish perimeter positions, maintain visual contact with adjacent units, report any anomalies immediately. The Jaegers spread out, each pair taking their assigned coordinates. The port fuel depot sat in the center, a sprawling facility of storage tanks and processing equipment. 38 buildings, 7 kilometers of pipeline. Too much territory to defend properly with the forces available. Jake's comm unit activated. Private channel. Morrison's voice tight with controlled tension. Instructor Pentecost, we have movement, subsurface. Thermal sensors are picking up something in the drainage system beneath our position. Can you confirm it's the target? Negative, but it's large, and it's moving toward the surface. Jake pulled up her position on the tactical display. Point position exactly as assigned. First contact, exactly as predicted. Hold position, he ordered. Do not engage until you have visual confirmation. Copy. The seconds stretched. Jake watched Morrison's vital signs on the monitor. Heart rate elevated, but stable. Neural sync holding at 81%. She was handling the stress. Then her camera feed showed it. The street in front of her, Jaeger buckled. Asphalt cracked and heaved upward. Something red and gleaming emerged from below, larger than the protoform that had escaped Moyolan. The carapace had grown more elaborate segmented armor that looked almost decorative in its complexity. But this wasn't decoration. It was evolution. Purpose-built defenses against the weapons it had already encountered. The organism's form had changed, more elongated. 4 limbs plus a tail that ended in a pincer-like structure. It looked almost crustacean, like something that belonged in deep ocean trenches instead of urban infrastructure. Morrison's Jaeger raised its plasma rifle. Standard defensive posture. The organism tilted, what might have been its head, studying the machine with an intelligence that felt distinctly wrong for something without visible eyes. Command target confirmed, Morrison reported, requesting permission to engage. Negative, Quan responded. Your orders are to observe and contain. Heavy units are en route. Marshal, it's between us and the fuel depot. If we don't stop it now, the organism moved. Not toward Morrison, toward the depot. Fast. Faster than something that size should be able to move. Morrison's Jaeger tried to intercept moving to block the approach. The organism didn't slow. It lowered its shoulder and hit the Jaeger's leg joint. The same kind of targeted strike it had used on Titan Redeemer. Precision, memory, learning applied. Morrison's Jaeger stumbled. The pilot pair tried to compensate, but the neural lag between thought and action was just enough. The organism sprayed micro-oxygen at the compromised joint. Metal began to corrode. Joint integrity failing, Santos reported. We can't hold this position. Fall back to secondary, Jake ordered. Support units move up to... The organism climbed Morrison's Jaeger. Same tactic, same efficiency. It went for the con pod. Morrison and Santos fired their shoulder-mounted weapons, but the angle was wrong. The shots went wide. The organism reached the armored housing and began its work. "It's cutting through," Morrison said. Her voice had changed, higher, panic bleeding through training. Oh God, I can see it through the viewport. It's right there. The transmission cut. Not entirely. The comm link stayed active, but Morrison and Santos had stopped speaking. On the monitor, their neural sync spiked. 94%, 97%, 100%. The kind of synchronization that only happened under extreme stress. When two minds merged completely because the alternative was facing something alone that couldn't be faced alone. Jake watched the vital signs. Both pilots' heart rates had jumped to dangerous levels. Brain activity showed patterns consistent with extreme fear response. They were still alive, still conscious, but they weren't fighting anymore. They were frozen. "All units engage Hawaii," Quan ordered. "Get that thing off Morrison's Jaeger." The other cadets moved in. 11 training Jaegers converging on one target. They fired in coordinated volleys plasma rifles and conventional weapons, creating a crossfire that should have been overwhelming. The organism dropped from Morrison's Jaeger and disappeared into the subsurface infrastructure again. Not retreating. Repositioning. The cadets held their formation waiting for it to emerge. It came up behind Chen's unit. Same tactic, same precision. The cadet pair barely had time to react before their Jaeger was compromised. This time the organism didn't climb. It went for the ankle joint, crippling the machine's mobility, then moved on before support could arrive. 3 more Jaegers were hit in quick succession. Not killed. Crippled. Immobilized. The organism was systematically removing pieces from the board, eliminating options, creating gaps in the perimeter. And all the while, the shared communication channels carried what the pilots were experiencing to their companions. Through the comm feeds, through the visual data streaming from helmet cameras and Jaeger sensors, each cadet watched their comrades' struggles in real time. They heard Morrison's breathing accelerate. Saw the viewport camera feed showing the organism pressed against the glass. Watched joint integrity numbers plummet on their tactical displays. Not direct experience, but close enough. The certainty that what was happening to one could happen to any of them. The neural sync numbers started to fluctuate. 89%, 76%, 63%. Within each Jaeger pilot pair struggled to maintain cohesion. The stress was fracturing the drift connections, each pilot instinctively pulling back from their co-pilot, trying to shield themselves from the amplified fear that the neural bridge was carrying between them. "Command, this is Reyes." The captain's voice cut through the chaos. "We need to pull them back. They're falling apart." "They hold position," Quan said. "Marshal their cadets. This is their first engagement. They're not equipped for..." "They hold position. Reinforcements arrive in 40 minutes. If they break now, 40,000 civilians die." Jake pulled up the tactical display. 8 Jaegers still mobile, 4 immobilized but intact. The organism was nowhere visible on sensors, having retreated into the subsurface again. Planning its next move, learning from the engagement, adapting its strategy in real time. "All units, this is Pentecost," he said. "Pull back to defensive positions around the depot. Tight formation. Overlapping fields of fire. It's faster than you, smarter than you, but it's still alone. Make it come to you." The cadets complied, their Jaegers forming a defensive ring. The formation was textbook, everything they'd drilled. But the execution was ragged. Pilots were compensating for damaged joints, for fluctuating drift sync, for the simple fact that they were terrified. Morrison's comm activated. Her voice came through raw and hoarse. "Sir." It looked at me, through the viewport. I know it doesn't have eyes, but it looked at me. And it knew. It knew I was scared. It knew exactly how scared I was. And her voice broke. It waited. Just for a second. It waited to make sure I saw it. To make sure I understood what was coming. "Morrison, listen to me," Jake said. "You're experiencing neural feedback. What you felt, what you saw, it's getting amplified through the drift interface. You need to breathe. Center yourself. Find Santos in the neural bridge and hold on to that connection." "I can't. I keep seeing it. Every time I close my eyes, every time I try to sync, it's there, waiting." On the monitor, Morrison's neural sync had dropped to 47%, below minimum operational threshold. Her Jaeger was still standing, but it was barely responsive. A machine with no pilot in any meaningful sense. 3 more cadets reported similar symptoms. Neural feedback overload within their own con pods. The stress of watching their companions fall, combined with the demands of maintaining drift synchronization under combat conditions, was pushing pilot pairs past their breaking points. The organism emerged again. This time directly in front of the defensive ring. It stood in the open, fully visible, making no attempt to hide or use terrain. A deliberate choice. A statement. It had grown again. Still not kaiju scale, but larger than before. 7 meters, perhaps slightly more. The carapace had incorporated additional material scavenged from damaged infrastructure, creating a patchwork armor that reflected emergency lighting in dull reds and silvers. The tail had lengthened, the pincer structure more pronounced. A work in progress, still developing, but already formidable. And for the first time, Jake understood what Newt had been trying to explain. This wasn't a creature. It was a weapon system. Purpose-built to fight human psychology as much as human machinery. To break morale before breaking bodies. "Heavy units, ETA 38 minutes, Hayes reported. "Can they hold that long?" Jake watched the monitor. Watched neural sync numbers continue to drop across the board. Watched vital signs spike into dangerous territory as pilots struggled to maintain composure. "No," he said quietly. "They can't." The organism moved forward. Slowly this time. No rush. It had all the time in the world. The cadets' weapons tracked it, but nobody fired. Waiting for orders. Waiting for someone to tell them what to do against something that had already proven it could learn from every mistake they made. "All units," Kwan's voice. "Final authority. Fire." The defensive ring erupted. Plasma rifles and conventional weapons creating a storm of ordnance that converged on one target. The organism took the hits. Multiple penetrations, armor cracking, tissue exposed, real damage. When the barrage ended, it was still standing but wounded, visibly compromised. Then it moved. Not forward, backward. A tactical retreat that caught everyone off guard. It dropped into a service trench and disappeared from direct visual, using the terrain to break line of sight. The cadets held formation weapons trained on the last known position, waiting for it to emerge. It came up 50 meters to the left, having repositioned through subsurface access they hadn't secured. Not tanking their weapons, avoiding them. Learning to use the environment instead of just its own resilience. The carapace flowed like liquid. Mass redistributing. New structures emerging, wing-like protrusions. Not fully developed, more like scaffolding covered in membrane. Unfinished, but potentially functional. "It's developing aerial mobility," Gotautleb said from the command center. "The structure matches early-stage wing formation documented in..." The organism launched itself upward. Not flight. Something uglier. It used its powerful legs to vault, and the wing structures caught air, giving it just enough lift to glide over the defensive ring. Crude. Inefficient. But effective enough to reposition beyond the Jaeger's immediate engagement range. And then it emitted something. Not a vocalization exactly, a frequency. Infrasound mixed with ultrasonic components, cycling in a pattern that resonated through the Jaeger sensor arrays. The machines were designed to detect Kaiju signatures, to process sonic data, to filter out battlefield noise. This sound hit all those systems simultaneously, creating feedback loops that cascaded into the pilot interfaces. Every cadet pilot felt the effect, not as sound, but as disorientation. Vertigo. The neural bridges that connected each pilot pair began to overload, unable to process the conflicting sensory data flooding through the drift connection. Morrison's neural sync flatlined, dropped to 0. Her co-pilot Santos held on for another 3 seconds, fighting to maintain the connection alone before his sync collapsed as well. Across the defensive ring, neural synchronization shattered. Pilot pairs pulled out of drift to escape the sensory overload, and their Jaegers became statues. 50-ton monuments to the limitations of human-machine interface design. The Organism landed behind the defensive ring, between the disabled Jaegers and the fuel depot. It had won, not through strength, through understanding, through knowing exactly where human operators would break and applying pressure to that precise point. "Evacuate all pilots," Kwan ordered. Her voice had gone flat. "Disengage neural connection. Get them out of there before." The Organism didn't attack the pilots. It ignored the disabled Jaegers entirely. Instead, it turned toward the fuel depot and began walking. Steady, purposeful, like someone approaching a meal they'd been anticipating. Jake watched it go, watched his cadets' vital signs on the monitors, seeing the pattern of trauma settle into their nervous systems. They would survive. Their bodies would recover. But something else had been damaged. Something that might never heal properly. The heavy units arrived 36 minutes later. Too late to prevent the Organism from reaching the depot. Too late to prevent the fires that would burn for days. Too late to do anything except begin the grim work of extracting wounded pilots and calculating losses. Marshal Kwan stood in the command center watching smoke rise from the port district. 12 training Jaegers, 12 pilot pairs, all alive. All broken in ways that medical scanners couldn't quantify. "Recommendations?" she asked. Jake looked at the monitors, showing his cadets being extracted from their con pods. Young faces aged a decade in an hour. Eyes that had seen something they couldn't unsee. "We stopped sending them in piecemeal," he said. "We stopped treating this like a containment operation. We acknowledge what it is, which is a war, and we're losing." The Typhoon arrived like a strategic asset. Meteorological analysis had predicted it 3 days in advance, a massive low-pressure system, spinning off the Pacific carrying wind speeds that would ground aircraft and reduce visibility to near 0. Most military operations would wait it out. Find shelter, preserve equipment. Marshal Kwan saw it differently. "It's hunting us by thermal signature," she said, studying the weather projection overlaid with the Organism's movement patterns. Heavy rain, storm interference. Those conditions degrade sensor accuracy. "For both sides," Commander Hayes pointed out. "Yes, but we know where it is. We can choose the engagement zone, force it to fight on our terms for once." Jake stood at the tactical display watching the predicted storm track. The Typhoon would make landfall in 18 hours, bringing sustained winds of 140 kilometers per hour and rainfall measured in meters rather than millimeters. The kind of weather that turned infrastructure into debris and reduced naval operations to survival exercises. "You want to fight in that," he said. "I want to use it. The Organism has adapted to every advantage we've given it. Time to see how it handles disadvantage." Gotautleb approached, tablet in hand as always. "The heavy units are in position. Titan Redeemer has been extracted and is undergoing repairs. We have 3 operational Mark 6 Jaegers and 2 Mark 5s. Against a target that's proven capable of disabling 12 units simultaneously." The cadets were inexperienced, Kwan said, and their machines were outdated. This will be different. Will it? Newt's voice cut across the room. He'd been working at a terminal in the corner, analyzing tissue samples recovered from the fuel depot fires. Because from what I'm seeing, the organism isn't just learning tactics. It's learning material science. It's incorporating Jaeger alloys into its structure. Every time we engage, we're literally giving it our armor. Then we stop engaging with kinetic weapons, Jake said. Dr. Gotautleb mentioned temperature shock. Cryo weapons, Gotautleb nodded. We've requisitioned industrial freezing equipment from civilian contractors. Nitrogen spray systems, cryo lances. The technology exists, but it's designed for controlled environments, not battlefield deployment. Can it be mounted on Jaegers? With modifications. The engineering teams are working on it now, but field testing will be limited. Field testing will be the battle, Quan said. We don't have time for anything else. The organism is still in the port district, but it's moving, methodically, destroying infrastructure. If we don't contain it soon, we'll lose the entire coastal zone. Jake looked at the map, red markers showing confirmed positions. The organism had been busy since the fuel depot, water purification plants, power substations, communication hubs, each target chosen to maximize disruption while minimizing exposure. It was fighting a war of attrition and winning. Who's piloting the heavy units? He asked. Hayes pulled up a roster. Ranger teams from the Sydney and Tokyo Shatterdomes, veterans, multiple Kaiju kills. They know what they're doing. Against Kaiju, this is different. Everything about this situation is different, Pentecost. We adapt or we die. The briefing occurred in what used to be a commercial warehouse, hastily converted into a military staging area. The 5 Jaeger teams assembled in a semicircle while Quan outlined the operation. Behind her, a projection showed the storm system and the planned engagement zone. The organism's last confirmed position is here. She indicated a section of the port district. It's taken shelter in a derelict container facility, high structural density, multiple escape routes. Standard doctrine would be to seal the area and wait for better conditions. But we're not waiting, one of the pilots said. Lieutenant Zhao from Crimson Typhoon's successor unit. Correct. The storm arrives in 16 hours. We'll use that window to move into position. When the weather hits, we engage. The organism's thermal tracking will be compromised. Its mobility will be reduced. We'll have a tactical advantage for the first time since this began. What about our sensors? Another pilot asked. Storm conditions will affect us too. They will, which is why we're using a modified formation. 3 units form a containment triangle. 2 units hold reserve positions. Visual contact will be primary. Sensor data will be supplemental only. If it moves, you see it first, confirm with instruments second. Gotautleb stepped forward. The cryo weapons are your primary offensive capability. Standard plasma and kinetic weapons have proven insufficient. The organism adapts to damage. But rapid temperature change disrupts its molecular structure faster than it can compensate. Hit it hard, hit it fast, and don't give it time to adjust. What if it runs? Zhao asked. Then you let it. Our objective isn't to kill it in one engagement. Our objective is to wound it. Slow it down. Give us time to develop a more permanent solution. Jake watched the pilots absorb this. They were professionals. They understood the reality of asymmetric warfare. Sometimes victory meant surviving long enough to try again. The deployment began at dawn. 5 Jaegers moving through evacuated streets while the sky darkened with approaching weather. The wind had already picked up, carrying the smell of ozone and sea spray. Debris rolled through intersections. Abandoned vehicles sat at angles, suggesting their owners had left in a hurry. Jake monitored from the mobile command unit a reinforced trailer truck carrying communication equipment and enough armor to withstand anything short of a direct Kaiju strike. Probably. The vehicle rocked in the wind as the storm front arrived ahead of schedule. All units, this is command. Quan's voice carried through the comm system. Weather conditions accelerating. Winds at 80 kilometers per hour and rising. Visibility down to 300 meters. Proceed to engagement zone and establish containment positions. The Jaegers moved into formation. Crimson Typhoon II took point. Shadow Justice and Pacific Sentinel formed the flanking positions. Titan Redeemer, still showing signs of recent repair work, held the rear approach. The 5th Unit November Ajax maintained a mobile reserve position. On the tactical display, the Organism appeared as a heat signature deep within the container facility. Stationary. Perhaps sheltering from the storm, or perhaps waiting. With this thing, prediction had become impossible. Contact in 2 minutes, Zhao reported. We're seeing structural damage consistent with previous sites. Containers ripped apart, metal stripped. It's been feeding. The rain hit like artillery. Visibility dropped to nothing in seconds. The Jaeger cameras showed only gray static, punctuated by occasional glimpses of terrain. Thermal sensors became the primary navigation tool, painting the world in reds and blues. Target is moving, Pacific Sentinel reported. Heading toward the waterfront. Speed approximately 30 kilometers per hour. Shadow Justice intercept, Quan ordered. Crimson Typhoon flank right. Do not let it reach open water. The Jaegers moved through the storm. Jake watched their positions on the tactical display, seeing the geometry of the engagement take shape. A classic pincer movement executed in conditions that would ground most military operations. Shadow Justice reached the intercept point first. Through the rain and wind, its cameras caught glimpses of the Organism moving between containers. Larger now. The size estimates had been conservative. This thing was pushing 8 meters, maybe more. The carapace gleamed wetly, reflecting nothing. Pure black in the thermal imaging. Cold. As if it was absorbing heat rather than radiating it. Target acquired. Shadow Justice's pilot reported, preparing to engage with cryo-lance, the weapon deployed from the Jaeger's forearm. A modified industrial freezer compressed into a weapon system. It looked jury-rigged because it was. The engineering teams had done their best, but there'd been no time for proper integration. Shadow Justice fired. The cryo-lance hit the Organism center mass. Liquid nitrogen at negative 196 degrees Celsius made contact with organic tissue. Steam exploded outward as water in the creature's cells flash froze. The carapace cracked. Surface layers shattered like glass. The Organism stumbled. First real sign of pain Jake had seen it exhibit. It turned toward Shadow Justice, and even through the degraded video feed, the intelligence was visible. Recognition. This weapon was different. This weapon hurt. It charged. Shadow Justice braced for impact, but the Organism didn't hit the Jaeger head-on. It went low, targeting the knee joint. Same tactic as before. Learned behavior. But this time, the Jaeger was ready. The pilot pair shifted weight, rotating the leg to present armored plating instead of the joint. The Organism's strike glanced off. It tried to adjust to find the vulnerability. But Shadow Justice's co-pilot triggered a secondary cryospray, not as powerful as the lance, but enough to coat the Organism's surface with freezing vapor. It retreated. Fast, disappearing into the maze of containers, while frost formed on its carapace. Damage assessment, Quan demanded. Negative on our systems, Shadow Justice reported. Target took significant damage. Observed structural failure in carapace, multiple fracture points. It's hurting. Crimson Typhoon, do you have visual? Negative. Lost contact in the rain. Thermal signature is strange. It's reading flat. Low emissivity, like it's using the rain and cold metal to mask its heat output. Jake leaned closer to the monitor. It's adapting already, changing its thermal profile to avoid detection. Can it do that? Hayes asked. Apparently, Newt said from his workstation. Kaiju biology is designed for rapid environmental adaptation. The rain provides cooling, surface evaporation. It's not generating less heat, it's dissipating it more efficiently, matching background thermal noise. How do we track it if it's thermally invisible? Motion sensors, seismic. Look for what it displaces, not what it is. Quan issued new orders. All units switch to seismic detection. Target will register as ground displacement. Coordinate your positions. Don't let it break the perimeter. The Jaegers adjusted. Their sensors recalibrated. For 30 seconds, nothing moved in the storm except wind and rain. Then Pacific Sentinel reported contact. Seismic reading bearing 270. Moving fast. Heading toward Schmatayjaya Sasmimi. The organism emerged from below. It had gone underground using storm drains or service tunnels to bypass the surface perimeter. It came up directly beneath Pacific Sentinel's position carapace, erupting through asphalt with enough force to destabilize the Jaeger's footing. Pacific Sentinel fell. Not catastrophically, but enough to break formation to create an opening. The organism didn't press the attack. Instead, it ran, away from the container facility, toward the waterfront. November Ajax intercept, Quan ordered. The reserve Jaeger moved to block. It had been positioned for exactly this scenario. But the organism saw it coming, saw the trap, and did something none of them had predicted. It jumped. The proto-wing structures that had been barely functional in the previous engagement had developed. Not enough for sustained flight, but enough for this. The organism launched itself upward and forward, gliding over November Ajax's position, clearing the Jaeger by meters. "It's going airborne," Jake said. "All units, it's going airborne." The organism landed in the water. The harbor. Visibility was 0 this close to the storm center, but thermal and seismic sensors showed it moving. Not swimming, walking, along the harbor floor, using the water as cover. "We can't follow it there," Zhao said. "Not in these conditions. Sonars, useless in the storm currents, will break formation and cryo-weapons need line of sight. We'd be fighting blind." "Then we force it back to land," Quan said. Titan Redeemer's Shadow Justice establish a barrier at the waterline. When it surfaces, hit it with everything. The two Jaegers took positions. Their cryo-weapons hummed ready. Jake watched the organism's signature move along the seabed. It was circling, looking for weaknesses, testing the perimeter. A cargo ship abandoned during the evacuation sat at anchor 50 meters from the Jaeger positions. The organism moved toward it, climbed the hull, emerged on deck in a location where the storm created a blind spot in the Jaeger sensor arrays. "Contact lost," Titan Redeemer reported. "We can't see through the weather. If it's on that ship, we're shooting blind." Quan made the decision in seconds. "All units converge on that vessel. Coordinated fire. Cryo-weapons only. Target the deck, the rails, the access points. Make it unstable. On my mark." The Jaegers adjusted position. Their weapons tracked the ship. Jake could see the tactical problem. If they fired and missed, they'd deplete their cryo reserves. If they didn't fire, the organism would use the ship as a platform to escape or attack from an unexpected angle. "Mark," Quan said. 5 cryo-weapons discharged simultaneously. The ship's deck flash froze. Rails turned brittle. Access ladders cracked. The metal became unstable, unable to support weight properly. Not a complete freeze, just enough to turn the structure into a trap. The organism emerged from the wreckage. Moving before the ice could trap it. The glide wings deployed, and it vaulted toward Crimson Typhoon 2, covering the distance in a single bound that looked more like an assault than an escape. It hit the Jaeger mid-torso. The impact rocked Crimson Typhoon back 3 steps. The organism clung to the armor, positioning itself above the con pod. Not attacking yet, just holding. Making sure the pilots could see it through their viewport. Xiao's voice came through tight with controlled panic. "It's on us, right on the glass. I can see it's looking right at us." "Shake it off," Quan ordered. "We're trying. It's not moving. It's just looking." Jake understood what was happening. The organism wasn't trying to kill them. Not yet. It was making them afraid first, breaking their confidence. The same tactic it had used on the cadets. "Titan Redeemer assist," Quan ordered. Titan Redeemer moved in trying to grab the organism off its companion unit. But the moment the Jaeger reached out, the organism dropped away, landed on Titan Redeemer's extended arm, ran up it like a ramp, went for that Jaeger's con pod instead. "It's playing with us," Newt said quietly. "It knows we can hurt it now. So it's hurting us back, psychologically." The organism sprayed micro-oxygen across Titan Redeemer's viewport. The armored glass held, but the metal frame began to pit. Small holes appeared in the seals, growing. The pilots inside could see the corrosion spreading around the edges, compromising the structural integrity that kept the viewport secure. Shadow Justice fired its cryo-lance. Not at the organism, at the viewport frame, flash freezing the corroded metal and seals before the breach could complete. Locking the damage in place, the organism jumped clear again. This time, it didn't land. The wing structures caught air. Not true flight, something cruder. Storm-assisted. The typhoon winds gave it lift it couldn't generate alone, allowing it to vault distances that should have been impossible. Ugly, violent, but functional. "It's airborne," Hayes said. "Using the storm." "How is that possible? Those wings shouldn't generate enough lift." "They don't," Gotautleb said. "Not on their own. It's using wind shear, riding pressure differentials. The storm is doing half the work." "Can we bring it down?" Quan asked. "Not with cryo-weapons. Wrong firing angle. We'd need anti-air capabilities." The organism circled above the Jaegers, just outside effective weapon range. Jake watched it on the displays, watched it study the machines below, learning their formation, their responses, banking data for the next engagement. Then it flew away. Not fleeing, just leaving, back toward the port district, back toward the industrial zone where it had been systematically destroying infrastructure. "Do we pursue?" Zhao asked. Quan looked at the tactical display, at the 5 Jaegers all showing varying degrees of damage, at the storm that was still intensifying, at the organism disappearing into weather that would ground any human aircraft. "Negative," she said. "All units return to staging area. We've learned what we needed to learn." "Which is?" Jake asked. "That we heard it. It ran. That's progress." The Jaegers withdrew in formation, moving through a rain that had become nearly horizontal. The storm had reached its peak intensity. Winds that could flip vehicles, rain that reduced visibility to arm's length. And somewhere in that chaos, something was flying. Something that should have been grounded, but had instead adapted. Again. The debriefing occurred in the warehouse. Pilots stood in their dripping suits while Gotautleb presented analysis. Video feeds from the engagement. Thermal data. Structural assessment of the organism's new capabilities. "The wing development is remarkable," Gotautleb said. "It achieved functional flight in less than 96 hours. That rate of evolution is unprecedented in natural biology." "It's not natural," Newt said. "It's precursor design. Built to adapt this fast. Built to win wars by outlasting the opposition's ability to counter." "Can we counter it?" one of the pilots asked. "Maybe. The cryo weapons were effective. We observed significant structural damage. But it learned from the first hit, started insulating itself, changing its thermal profile. Next time it'll be more resistant." "So we use heat instead," Jake suggested. "Alternate between extreme cold and extreme heat. Force it to choose which vulnerability to protect against." Gotautleb nodded. "Thermally speaking, yes. But we'd need weapons capable of generating extreme heat in battlefield conditions. Plasma weapons work, but not at the intensity required for rapid shock. What about reactor overload? Zhao asked. Use the Jaeger's own power plant as a weapon. That would be a one-way trip, Quan said. Maybe. But if it's a choice between losing one Jaeger and losing the coastal zone, the room went quiet. Everyone understood what was being proposed. A suicide run. Acceptable losses framed in the cleanest possible terms. We're not there yet, Quan said. But keep it in reserve. If containment fails, if the organism reaches population centers, we may need to consider extreme options. Jake watched the pilots absorb this. Watched them calculate their own mortality against the tactical necessities. This was what the war had always been about. Not glory or heroism, but the mathematics of sacrifice. Dismissed, Quan said. Get some rest. We deploy again in 12 hours. The pilots filed out. Jake remained studying the video feeds from the engagement, watching the moment when the organism had looked through Crimson Typhoon's viewport, seeing the calculation in that eyeless face. The intelligence. Newt appeared beside him. You're looking for a tell. Something that predicts its next move. Am I that obvious? You're that desperate. We all are. Newt adjusted his glasses. But here's the thing about precursor bioweapons. They don't have tells. They don't make mistakes. They're designed to be perfect killing machines. The only reason we beat the Kaiju was because we closed the breach, cut them off from reinforcement. This thing doesn't need reinforcement. It is the reinforcement. Then we're fighting a war we can't win. No, we're fighting a war we can't win cleanly. There's a difference. Newt pulled up a molecular diagram on his tablet. Every biological system has a breaking point. A threshold where adaptation fails and the organism just breaks. We haven't found its threshold yet, but it exists. It has to. You're calling it again, Jake said. What? Earlier you said Destoroyah. Now back to it. Newt looked at his tablet. The K-Science team started using that designation. Destoroyah. Destroy plus something. Dark humor. Gallows joke. But it stuck. Things this dangerous deserve names. Makes them easier to fight. Gives us something concrete to hate properly. Or fear. Fear works too. Jake left the warehouse as the storm began to weaken. The rain had reduced to a steady pour. The wind had backed off to merely dangerous instead of catastrophic. Morning light struggled through the cloud cover, turning everything gray and uncertain. The Jaegers stood in their holding positions, water streaming off their armor. 50-ton monuments to human engineering. To the belief that problems could be solved with enough metal and firepower. That belief had been tested today and found wanting, but they'd heard it. That counted for something. The creature that had seemed unstoppable had been forced to retreat. Not defeated, not contained, but hurt. Made to run. It was progress. Small. Insufficient. But progress nonetheless. Jake looked toward the port district. Toward the industrial zone where Destoroyah was undoubtedly sheltering. Planning. Adapting. Preparing for the next engagement. Somewhere in that ruined landscape, a war was being fought that most people didn't even know about. A war against something that was designed to be unbeatable. A war they might not win, but they'd keep fighting anyway. Because the alternative was unthinkable. Because surrender wasn't an option. Because sometimes progress meant surviving long enough to try again. The storm passed. The city dripped, and in the distance, something watched and waited and learned. The drone footage arrived at 0300. Automated surveillance units had been monitoring the port district through the night, tracking heat signatures and structural damage. What they found changed everything. Jake watched the playback in the command center. Thermal imaging showed Destoroyah moving through the industrial zone with purpose. Not hunting, Not destroying infrastructure. Moving towards something specific. "Where's it going?" Commander Hayes asked. Gotautleb overlaid a map on the display. "Based on current trajectory, it's heading toward the decommissioned storage facility. Subsector 9. What's stored there?" The silence that followed carried weight. Newt was the one who finally answered, his voice carefully controlled. "Remnants from the uprising. Deactivated drone cores. Kaiju brain tissue kept for study. Equipment we couldn't risk destroying because we didn't fully understand how the precursors had modified it." Marshal Quan turned from the display. "That facility was supposed to be under maximum security." "It is," Hayes said. "Biometric locks, armed guards, redundant power systems. Nothing gets in without authorization." "Unless it doesn't go through the door," Jake said. "The thing has been using subsurface infrastructure since day one. Storm drains, service tunnels. It could bypass surface security entirely." Quan made the decision immediately. "Deploy all available units. Establish a perimeter around that facility. If Destoroyah reaches those drone cores, we don't know what happens. I'm not interested in finding out." The Jaegers moved out within 20 minutes. 4 units. Titan Redeemer still showed battle damage from the storm engagement armor plating scorched, where cryo-weapons had misfired joints, moving with slight hesitation that suggested hydraulic stress. Crimson Typhoon 2 and Shadow Justice flanked it. November Ajax held reserve position. Jake monitored from the mobile command unit, watching their progress through satellite overlay. The facility sat in an industrial wasteland surrounded by buildings that had been condemned after Kaiju blue contamination. A dead zone in the middle of a dying city. "Contact in 5 minutes," Zhao reported. "We're seeing evidence of recent activity. Ground displacement, chemical residue consistent with micro-oxygen exposure." "It's already been here," Gotautleb said from his workstation. He was running comparative analysis on tissue samples looking for patterns in Destoroyah's behavior. Or it's scouting. Learning the approach before committing. "Can we seal the facility remotely?" Quan asked. "The security systems are air-gapped," Hayes said. "No network connection. It's designed that way specifically to prevent tampering. We'd need physical access to initiate lockdown. Then send a team. Marshal if Destoroyah is inside. Then the team extracts immediately. But we need to know if those cores are secure." A Hazmat unit was already staging. 6 personnel in reinforced suits carrying detection equipment and enough firepower to handle conventional threats. Not enough for what they were actually facing. But sometimes you had to work with insufficient resources. Jake watched them enter the facility through the main access point. Their helmet cameras showed corridors that looked untouched, clean, sterile. The kind of place where dangerous things were kept quiet and out of sight. The team reached the storage vault without incident. Biometric scan, passcode entry, heavy doors sliding open with hydraulic precision. Everything functioning normally until they saw inside. "Command, this is Hazmat 6. The team leader's voice came through steady despite what the camera was showing. "The vault has been compromised. Containment units are damaged. Cores are missing." The feed showed empty cradles where drone cores should have been. Shattered containment vessels. And on the walls, the distinctive pitting pattern of micro-oxygen corrosion. "How many cores?" Quan demanded. "Counting now. 7 confirmed missing. 3 Kaiju brain tissue samples also gone." Newt was already pulling up files. "Those cores were from the Tokyo incident. Generation 3 drones. The precursors had modified them with direct neural interface capability. And the brain tissue samples were active. Not dead tissue. Living cells kept in stasis." "What can it do with those?" Jake asked. "I don't know. The precursors used drone cores and Kaiju brains together during the uprising to create a distributed intelligence network, multiple breach points, coordinated attacks across continents. But that required infrastructure, facilities, time to integrate the technology. Unless it doesn't need time," Gotautleb said quietly. unless it's designed to integrate rapidly. To incorporate technology the same way it incorporates armor plating and thermal adaptation. The implications spread through the command center like cold water. Hazmat 6, extract immediately, Quan ordered. All Jaeger units maintain perimeter. Do not let anything leave that zone. The Hazmat team was moving toward the exit when the building's power failed. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in red. The team leader's camera swung around, covering their retreat path. Something moved in the darkness. Not running, just shifting position, making itself known. Destoroyah emerged into the emergency lighting. Larger than the storm engagement, the carapace had thickened, incorporated more material. The wing structures sat folded against its back, no longer crude appendages, but integrated components. And embedded in its thorax, partially visible through translucent armor, were the unmistakable shapes of drone cores. 7 points of dim light pulsing in synchronized rhythm. Contact Hazmat 6 reported, voice still steady, training overriding fear. Target is inside the facility. It's between us and the exit. Jaegers breached the facility, Quan ordered. Extract that team. Titan Redeemer's fist punched through the western wall. Concrete and steel parted like paper. The Jaeger's hand reached into the building, searching for the Hazmat team. Destoroyah didn't attack. It watched. The drone cores in its body pulsed faster. And somewhere in the subsurface infrastructure, something responded. Jake saw it on the seismic monitors first. Multiple signatures, converging on the facility from different directions, moving fast. We have movement, he said. Underground, multiple contacts. More of them, Hayes asked. No. Different signature, smaller but numerous. The first one broke surface 50 meters from Titan Redeemer. A juvenile form, like the prototype from Moyolan, but more developed. It moved with the same disturbing intelligence, the same purposeful efficiency. Then another emerged, and another. 5 juveniles in total, each one approximately 3 meters tall, each one moving to surround the Jaeger positions. It's not alone anymore, Newt said. It multiplied, or it created subordinates. Either way, we're not facing one target. We're facing a hierarchy. The juveniles attacked in coordination, not random, tactical. 3 went for Titan Redeemer's damaged joints. 1 targeted Shadow Justice's sensor array. The 5th moved toward the Hazmat team, cutting off their extraction route. November Ajax intercept, Quan ordered. The reserve Jaeger moved in plasma rifle, tracking the juvenile heading for the Hazmat team. It fired. The shot hit clean. The juvenile staggered but didn't fall. Its carapace showed damage but no critical failure. Then it did something unexpected. It opened its mouth and sprayed a thin stream of micro-oxygen. Not at the Jaeger. At the ground between them. The asphalt corroded, creating a barrier of unstable terrain that would collapse under a Jaeger's weight. They're learning tactics, Jake said. Not just copying Destoroyah, developing their own approaches. Titan Redeemer managed to extract the Hazmat team, pulling them clear of the facility while fighting off 3 juveniles simultaneously. The team scrambled toward the perimeter, moving as fast as their suits would allow. But Destoroyah wasn't focused on the Jaegers anymore. It was focused on something else. The drone cores embedded in its body pulsed in a pattern Jake recognized from old intelligence briefings. A sequence. Like a digital handshake. It's activating them, Newt said. The cores, it's trying to interface with whatever precursor technology is still responsive. The breach is closed, Gotautleb said. There's nothing for it to connect to. The breach in the Pacific is closed, but the facility has equipment. Prototype breach detection arrays. Partially disassembled portal generators kept for research. If it can access that technology, the building shook. Not from Jaeger movement. from something inside. A vibration that carried through the ground, through the air, resonating at a frequency that made instrument panels flicker. Energy spike, Hayes reported. Massive. Coming from inside the facility. Jake pulled up the building schematic. The research level, sub-level 3. That's where they kept the portal technology. Can it actually open a breach? Quan asked. Not a full one, Newt said. The equipment isn't complete, but a partial activation, a flicker maybe. The precursors designed everything to be modular, compatible. If Destoroyah has integrated the drone cores properly, if it understands the architecture, the air above the facility distorted. Not dramatically, just a shimmer. Like heat haze, except the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last minute. The distortion pulsed in rhythm with the energy readings. We're seeing spatial anomalies, Gotautleb said. His voice had gone flat. The tone of a man watching theory become terrible reality. Localized gravity fluctuations, electromagnetic interference. This is consistent with early-stage breach formation. How long until it stabilizes? Quan asked. Unknown. The original breaches took months to develop. But this has active Kaiju biology directing it, accelerating the process. It could be hours, could be minutes. All units, new objective? Quan's voice cut through the comm channels with absolute authority. Destroy that facility. Bring it down. I don't care about the research. I don't care about salvage. Bury everything inside. The Jaegers opened fire. Plasma rifles at maximum output. Missiles. Anything with enough explosive yield to reduce concrete and steel to rubble. The building began to collapse, sections pancaking into themselves. But the distortion in the air didn't fade. It intensified. Through the destruction, Destoroyah emerged, moving through falling debris like it was rain. The juveniles followed, using the chaos as cover. The drone cores in Destoroyah's body were fully active, now bright points of light visible even through the dust and smoke. And behind it, barely visible through the spatial distortion, something else appeared. A flicker. A glimpse of somewhere that wasn't Earth. The characteristic purple-orange light of breach energy, unstable and fragmentary, but present. It worked, Newt said quietly. It actually worked. It opened a doorway. Can anything come through? Jake asked. At this size, number may be signal transmission. Data, but not physical objects? Not yet. Destoroyah stood in front of the flickering distortion. The drone cores pulsed. And through whatever connection it had established, something responded. Not words, not communication in any human sense, but acknowledgement, recognition. The precursors knew one of their weapons had evolved. Target the breach, Quan ordered. Destabilize it. Break whatever connection it's established. Crimson Typhoon 2 fired directly at the spatial distortion. The plasma bolt passed through the flicker and disappeared. Not blocked. Redirected. Somewhere else. Firing through the breach is feeding it, Gotautleb said. The energy is being absorbed, converted. We're making it stronger. Then we target Destoroyah directly, Quan said. Cut it off from the breach. Sever the connection. The Jaegers focused fire on the creature itself. Coordinated volleys designed to overwhelm its defensive capabilities. But the juveniles intercepted, throwing themselves into the line of fire, taking damage meant for their progenitor. They were protecting it, sacrificing themselves to buy time. It's teaching them, Jake said. Not just tactics, loyalty, hierarchy. It's building an army. Destoroyah remained at the breach, flicker the drone cores pulsing faster. Information was flowing both ways now. Data from the precursor's side. Whatever remained of their civilization. Whatever plans they'd left embedded in their technology. And data flowing back. Everything Destoroyah had learned about Earth's defenses, about Jaeger capabilities, about human psychology and strategic limitations. The breach flicker expanded. Still not large enough for physical transit, but growing, stabilizing. The spatial distortion spread outward, creating a zone where normal physics became suggestions rather than laws. Inside that zone, gravity fluctuated. Electromagnetic fields spiraled, and Destoroyah began to change again. The transformation was faster than before. The carapace flowing like liquid mass, redistributing structures emerging that hadn't been there seconds ago. The wings spread fully, no longer protoforms, but complete assemblies. The tail elongated, the pincer structure becoming more elaborate. The body itself grew, pushing 8 meters toward 9. "It's using the breach energy," Gotautleb said, "drawing power directly from the spatial distortion. This is controlled evolution, directed transformation." "Can we shut it down?" Quan asked. "Not with conventional weapons. The breach is self-sustaining now. It'll continue to grow until it either stabilizes into a full portal or the energy source is disrupted." "What energy source?" "Destoroyah. It's the anchor point, the biological interface. Remove it, the breach collapses." Quan looked at the tactical display. 4 Jaegers, multiple juveniles, and one increasingly powerful target that was using impossible technology to remake itself in real time. "Titan Redeemer," she said. "Absolute Zero protocol. Prepare for reactor destabilization." The command center went quiet. Everyone understood what that meant. What she was authorizing. Jake watched Titan Redeemer's pilot status. Chen and Rodriguez, veterans. They'd survived the first engagement with Destoroyah, survived the storm battle. And now they were being asked to walk into a spatial distortion carrying an overloading nuclear reactor. "Confirmed," Chen's voice came through, steady, professional. "Initiating absolute zero sequence. Reactor safety protocols disengaged. We have approximately 4 minutes until critical mass." The Jaeger began moving toward Destoroyah. The other units provided covering fire, keeping the juveniles occupied. Titan Redeemer walked through plasma and debris, heading straight for the creature standing at the breach flicker. Destoroyah saw it coming, recognized the threat. The juveniles tried to intercept, but Shadow Justice and Crimson Typhoon 2 held them back. 3 minutes until reactor critical. Titan Redeemer closed to 50 meters. The spatial distortion began affecting its systems. Instruments flickering. Neural handshake stability dropping. The pilots fought to maintain control as physics itself became unreliable. 2 minutes. Destoroyah moved. Fast. It covered the distance in seconds, using the storm-assisted glide technique to vault over Titan Redeemer's defensive perimeter. It landed on the Jaeger's back, went for the reactor housing. The pilots couldn't shake it, couldn't reach it. The angle was wrong. 1 minute 30 seconds. "All units clear the blast radius," Quan ordered. "Chen Rodriguez, eject now." "Negative," Chen said. "Ejection systems are compromised. The distortion is interfering with the con pod release mechanism. Then abort the sequence." "Also compromised. The reactor cascade is locked in. We're committed." Jake watched the countdown. Watched Destoroyah tearing through Titan Redeemer's armor, trying to reach the reactor before it exploded. Trying to claim that energy for itself. 45 seconds. "Shadow Justice, November Ajax." Quan's voice was ice. "Cryo weapons, full discharge. Freeze Destoroyah to that Jaeger. Lock it down." Both units fired simultaneously. Liquid nitrogen at negative 196 degrees hit Destoroyah and Titan Redeemer together. Ice spread across both, binding them. The creature struggled, but the freeze was too rapid, too complete. 30 seconds. "All personnel maximum safe distance," Quan ordered. "Brace for detonation." The mobile command unit's shutters closed. Reinforced plating sliding into place. Jake had one last glimpse of Titan Redeemer frozen in its final position. Covered in ice and holding a monster that had tried to bridge worlds. 20 seconds. Through the audio feed, he heard Chen's voice one last time. It was an honor. 10 seconds. The breach flicker pulsed, growing brighter, as if something on the other side was watching. waiting to see if their weapon would survive. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The reactor went critical. The explosion was visible from orbit. A miniature sun born in the industrial wasteland, expanding outward with enough energy to vaporize everything within 200 meters. The shockwave shattered windows 5 kilometers away. The breach flicker destabilized. The spatial distortion collapsed inward, unable to maintain coherence without its biological anchor. For a moment the air screamed as physics reasserted itself violently. Then silence. The mushroom cloud rose slowly, a pillar of destruction marking where Titan Redeemer had made its final stand, where Chen and Rodriguez had chosen to die rather than let Destoroyah complete its transformation. Jake opened the shutters, looked at the devastation. The facility was gone. The breach was gone. Destoroyah was energy readings, Hayes said. His voice was hollow. Residual thermal signature. At the blast center. Something survived. The satellite feed updated. Through the smoke and radiation, something was moving. Smaller than before. Damaged. But alive. Destoroyah emerged from the crater. The explosion had stripped away most of its armor. The drone cores were gone, destroyed by the heat. The wings were charred stumps. But it was walking. Slowly, deliberately, away from the blast site, toward the water. It survived, Newt said. A nuclear detonation, point blank, and it survived. Not intact, Gotautleb said. Look at the thermal readings. Its body temperature is spiking. Cellular breakdown. The reactor heat is causing internal damage faster than it can compensate. How long until it dies? Quan asked. Unknown, but it's wounded, critically. This might be our only chance to finish it. With what we just threw everything at it. Used a nuclear reactor as a weapon, and it's still moving. Jake watched the feed. Watched Destoroyah drag itself toward the harbor. Toward water. Toward cooling that might save it from the heat, death spreading through its body. We don't need to kill it, he said. We need to make sure it can't heal, can't adapt, can't come back stronger. How? Quan asked. Jake looked at Gotautleb, at Newt, at the 2 scientists who understood this thing better than anyone. You said every biological system has a breaking point, he said. Temperature shock. Extreme cold followed by extreme heat. We just hit it with heat. Now we hit it with cold, before it can adapt to either. Gotautleb understood immediately. The cryo-weapons. Full deployment, everything we have left. Freeze it while it's still overheated. The thermal stress will shatter it at the molecular level. Will it work? Quan asked. But theory suggests yes. Reality. Gotautleb shrugged. We're beyond established parameters, but it's the best option we have. Quan made the call. All remaining units, intercept target before it reaches the water. Deploy all cryo weapons. This is our last shot. The 3 surviving Jaegers moved to intercept. Wounded, low on ammunition, systems degraded from multiple engagements, but still operational, still fighting. They caught Destoroyah at the waterline. The creature turned to face them, its carapace cracked and smoking its body, radiating heat like a furnace. It had nothing left to fight with. No armor, no weapons. Just the fundamental will to survive that had carried it this far. The Jaegers fired. Every cryo weapon, every reserve tank. Liquid nitrogen flooded the beach, turning sand to glass, freezing seawater into jagged ice sculptures. And in the center of it all, Destoroyah froze. Its superheated body met sub-zero cold in a collision of thermal extremes that its biology couldn't process. The creature's carapace cracked. Fissures spread across its surface like lightning. Internal structures failed as water in its cells expanded and contracted simultaneously. It tried to move, tried to adapt one more time. But the damage was too severe, too rapid, too absolute. Destoroyah shattered, not explosively, quietly. Pieces of its frozen body simply separated, falling away like broken glass. The creature that had survived everything they'd thrown at it finally reached its threshold. The point where adaptation failed and biology just stopped. The Jaegers held position weapons, trained on the fragments, waiting for any sign of movement. Any indication that this wasn't over. Minutes passed. The ice began to melt in the residual heat, and the fragments didn't move. "Confirmed," Gotautleb said. His voice was quiet, reverent almost. "Cellular activity ceased. No thermal signature, no structural cohesion. It's dead." The command center was silent. Everyone processing what they'd just witnessed, what they'd just survived. Marshal Quan looked at the display showing 3 damaged Jaegers standing over frozen fragments of something that should never have existed. "Status of the juveniles?" she asked. "Fled during the final engagement," Hayes reported. "Scattered into the subsurface infrastructure. We're tracking 5 distinct signatures moving away from the blast site. Recommendations? Hunt them down, eliminate them before they can grow, before they can become what Destoroyah was." Quan nodded slowly. "Initiate containment protocols, quarantine the entire industrial zone. Nothing gets in or out without Hazmat clearance. And catalog every fragment of Destoroyah. I want analysis on everything. We need to understand exactly what we just fought, and how to make sure it never happens again." She turned from the display, walked toward the exit, paused at the door. "And prepare a memorial for Titan Redeemer's crew. They saved us all. Make sure history remembers that." She left. The command center slowly returned to operational routine. Damage reports, casualty counts, resource allocation, the mechanical aftermath of survival. Jake remained at his station watching the satellite feed. The frozen fragments, the evacuation zones, the scars left across a city that would take generations to heal. They'd won, at terrible cost, with sacrifices that would haunt the survivors forever. But they'd won. The war was over, for now. But as Jake watched the fragments begin their long journey to Hazmat, Containment, watched the juveniles scatter into darkness, he understood something fundamental. Destoroyah was dead. But the threat wasn't. Not really. Not as long as pieces remained. Not as long as the juveniles survived. And somewhere deep in the frozen fragments, something pulsed. Barely. A flicker of cellular activity so faint the sensors almost missed it. Almost. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape again. And this time, they'd have to be ready before it came back. The containment facility was a fortress built in 72 hours. Prefabricated walls, industrial refrigeration units running at maximum capacity. Armed perimeter. The kind of installation that said humanity had learned from its mistakes, but wasn't confident it had learned enough. Jake stood outside the primary vault, watching technicians transfer the last fragments into cryogenic storage. Each piece of Destoroyah's shattered body was cataloged, analyzed, and sealed in containers designed to prevent biological activity at any temperature above absolute zero. "How many fragments total?" he asked. Dr. Weiss, the K-Science lead for containment operations, checked her tablet. 347 pieces of varying size. The largest is approximately 2 meters. The smallest are microscopic. All show zero thermal activity, zero cellular function. By every measure we have, they're dead. By every measure we had, it was dead in Moyolan, Jake said. Before it woke up and killed 3 people. That was different. That was active tissue exposed to a catalyst. These are frozen fragments being kept at -70 degrees Celsius in sealed containers with continuous monitoring. "What's the protocol if something changes?" Weiss gestured to the vault door. 3-meter thick, steel-reinforced concrete. Liquid nitrogen flooding system that can drop the internal temperature to -200 degrees in under 30 seconds. And if that fails, explosive charges that will collapse the entire structure into a sealed tomb. She paused. We're not taking chances, Instructor Pentecost. Not after what we've seen. Jake nodded. The precautions were thorough, professional. Exactly what you'd expect from people who understood they were storing pieces of something that had rewritten the rules about what was possible. But precautions assumed you knew what you were protecting against. And with Destoroyah, assumptions had proven fatal. He found Gotautleb in the analysis lab bent over a microscope studying tissue samples with the intensity of someone who'd stopped sleeping properly days ago. Newt worked at an adjacent station running molecular scans, their old partnership rebuilt through necessity, if not trust. Anything? Jake asked. Confirmation of what we suspected, Gotautleb said without looking up. The cellular structure shows precursor markers, but they've been modified, hybridized with something else. Something that allowed for rapid adaptation and integration of non-biological materials. The oxygen destroyer, Newt added. The original weapon that killed the first Godzilla. We found chemical signatures in the tissue that match historical records. Somehow the precursors got access to that formula, used it as a catalyst, combined it with their own bioengineering. So it was designed, Jake said, not an accident. The Moyolan incident was an accident, Gotautleb said. But the underlying organism that was engineered, probably decades ago, planted as a dormant seed, waiting for the right conditions to activate. How many more seeds are there? Unknown. The precursors were methodical, redundant. If they planted one, they likely planted others. Other facilities. Other contamination sites. Anywhere Kaiju blue existed in sufficient concentration. Jake absorbed this. The implication that Destoroyah wasn't unique. That somewhere else, another catalyst might trigger another awakening. Another crisis. How do we stop it? He asked. We can't, Newt said bluntly. Not preventatively. There are hundreds of contamination sites worldwide. Thousands of stored tissue samples. We can't sterilize all of it without destroying decades of research and rendering massive areas permanently uninhabitable. So we wait for the next one to wake up, or we learn from this one. Gotautleb finally looked up from the microscope. The tissue samples we've recovered show a consistent vulnerability. Temperature shock. The organism could adapt to heat or cold individually, but rapid transitions between extremes disrupted its molecular stability. That's our baseline defense. Any future outbreak, we respond with thermal weapons immediately. Assuming we have time to respond, Jake said. Assuming the next one doesn't evolve faster. Neither scientist had an answer for that. Marshal Quan called an emergency briefing at 1800 hours. The assembled personnel represented every operational level of PPDC. Pilots, engineers, scientists, military command, all of them marked by the same exhaustion, the same weight of knowledge that victory had come with a price list still being calculated. Situation report, Quan began. Destoroyah fragments are in cryogenic containment. Continuous monitoring shows zero biological activity. The primary threat is neutralized. She pulled up a map showing the coastal industrial zone. Red markers indicated juvenile locations. Secondary threat remains active. We've tracked 5 juvenile organisms using subsurface movement patterns. Each is approximately 3 meters tall. Each shows tactical intelligence consistent with the primary creature. Attempts to engage have been unsuccessful. They flee when confronted using terrain and infrastructure to avoid direct combat. What's their objective? Someone asked. Unknown. They're not attacking, not destroying infrastructure. Just surviving, learning, waiting. For what? Quan's silence was answer enough. Waiting for orders. For reinforcement. For the primary organism to resurrect. No one knew, because understanding Destoroyah's psychology had proven as impossible as predicting its capabilities. Recommendations, Quan asked. Commander Hayes stood. We maintain pursuit. Dedicate resources to tracking and eliminating each juvenile before they can grow, before they can become threats on the scale of what we just fought. That could take months, a pilot said. They're underground. mobile. We'd need to deploy Jaegers in urban environments. The collateral damage is acceptable compared to the alternative, Hayes said flatly. These things killed 12 pilots, destroyed Moyolan, and nearly opened a breach to the precursor homeworld. We don't get the luxury of worrying about property damage. There's another option, Gotautleb said. Everyone turned. The scientist looked reluctant. The juveniles were following Destoroyah, taking orders. If that hierarchy still exists, if they're still waiting for commands, we might be able to use that. Use it how? Quan asked. The fragments we're storing. They still carry biological markers, pheromones, chemical signals. We could synthesize those signals, create a lure, draw the juveniles to a location of our choosing. And then what? We still need to kill them. We do, but in a controlled environment. Away from civilian infrastructure, we could turn one of the abandoned industrial sites into a kill box. Lure them in. Deploy overlapping cryo-weapons. Eliminate all 5 simultaneously. The room considered this. It was elegant, tactically sound. It also required using pieces of Destoroyah as bait, which meant handling those fragments, potentially exposing personnel to whatever residual threat they might carry. Timeline, Quan asked. 3 days to synthesize the lure, 2 days to prepare the site. 5 days total. Do it. But I want redundant safety protocols. Anyone handling those fragments does so in full hazmat with armed supervision. No exceptions. The briefing dissolved into logistics discussions. Jake slipped out quietly. He'd heard enough. Understood the plan. Recognized the necessity. But something bothered him. A detail his mind kept circling back to without identifying why it mattered. He found himself in the containment facility again. Standing outside the vault, watching the temperature readouts that confirmed everything inside was frozen solid. Dead. Harmless. The facility guard recognized him. Back again, sir. Just checking. We run diagnostics every 4 hours. Everything's solid. Nothing's changing. Good. Jake started to leave. Stopped. The largest fragment. The 2-meter piece. Where was it recovered from? The guard checked a terminal. Blast center. The reactor detonation site. It was part of the thoracic structure, showed the most direct exposure to extreme heat, and it's been stable. Completely. Temperature holding at -70. No cellular activity. No... The guard paused. Looked closer at his screen. That's odd. What? Temperature reading on Unit 7. That's the one holding the large fragment. It's showing -69.8. It changed 0.2 degrees in the last 6 hours. That's within instrument error margins. But it's trending upward. Jake felt cold certainty settle in his chest. Open the vault, now. Sir, that requires authorization from... I don't care. Open it. The guard must have seen something in Jake's expression. He initiated the override sequence. Biometric scan. Authorization codes. Heavy locks disengaging. The vault doors swung open, releasing a wave of sub-zero air that turned breath to fog. Inside, 347 containment units sat in precise rows, each one displaying a temperature readout, each one maintaining the -70 degrees specified by protocol. Except Unit 7, Jake approached it. The container was standard military-grade cryogenic storage. Transparent viewing panel, temperature controls on the side, and inside the largest fragment of Destoroyah's body. A section of thorax showing the distinctive segmented armor, the translucent sections where drone cores had been embedded. The temperature readout showed -69.6. It's warming up, Jake said. That's impossible, the guard said. The refrigeration system is functioning normally. There's no heat source. Yes, there is. Jake pointed at the fragment, at the very center where the tissue was darkest. It's generating its own heat. It's alive. The guard stared. The sensors would have detected. The sensors detect what we programmed them to detect. Thermal activity, cellular function, movement. But what if it's doing something we didn't program for? What if it's not alive in any way we recognize? Jake pulled out his comm unit. Dr. Gotautleb, get to the containment facility, now, and bring Newt. We have a problem. They arrived within 10 minutes. Both scientists immediately crowded around the container, running scans, taking readings, conferring in technical language that excluded everyone else. It's not generating heat, Gotautleb said finally. It's producing a chemical reaction. Exothermic. Slow, but continuous. The tissue is breaking down its own frozen structure to create thermal energy. That's not possible, the guard said. You can't create energy from nothing. You can if you're designed to, Newt said. Precursor biology doesn't follow Earth rules. This thing is using its own cellular death as fuel, controlled apoptosis. It's sacrificing frozen tissue to warm up the core. How long until it thaws completely? Jake asked. Gotautleb calculated rapidly. At current rate, 6 hours. But the process will accelerate as it warms. More cellular activity means more heat generation, means faster warming. It's exponential. Can we stop it? We could flood the vault with liquid nitrogen. Drop the temperature below what it can compensate for. Do it. The facility alarms activated as the emergency cooling system engaged. Vents opened. Liquid nitrogen poured into the vault at pressure, creating a fog so dense that visibility dropped to arm's length. The temperature readout on Unit 7 plummeted. -90, -100, -120. But the fragment didn't stop. The exothermic reaction continued. Slower, but still present. It's adapting, Newt said. Even frozen, even dead. Some part of it is still functioning, still learning. Then we destroy it, Jake said. The explosive charges collapse the vault. That won't work, Gotautleb said. The charges are designed to seal the facility, create a tomb. But if fragments survive the collapse, if even microscopic pieces remain viable, they'll just be buried. Waiting? This thing survived a nuclear explosion. Conventional explosives won't guarantee complete destruction. So what do? No one had an immediate answer. They watched the temperature readout fluctuate. Watched the fragment fight against every measure designed to keep it dormant. Then Quan's voice came through Jake's comm unit. Pentecost, report. Jake explained the situation. The warming fragment, the failed containment, the reality that killing Destoroyah might not have actually killed it. Quan listened without interruption. Then, we can't risk it regenerating. Not here, not anywhere near population centers. Agreed. But we need a solution that guarantees complete destruction. We have one. Her voice was cold, final. The ocean, deep water, extreme pressure. Deploy the fragment to the Mariana Trench. Let the ocean do what we can't. Marshal, if it survives the descent, then it's 7 miles underwater in conditions that would crush any known life form. If it can survive that, we've lost anyway, but at least it won't be our problem. The decision was made. Authorized at the highest levels. A single Jaeger November Ajax would carry the fragment to the deepest point in the Pacific Ocean. Would release it at pressure that exceeded any engineering specification. Would trust that depth and darkness and cold and crushing force would finish what nuclear fire had started. Jake volunteered to coordinate. Not because he thought he could help, but because someone who understood what they were dealing with needed to witness the end. The deployment occurred at midnight. November Ajax stood at the deployment dock, the fragment secured in a reinforced container attached to its torso. The Jaeger looked small against the ocean. Vulnerable. A 50-ton machine about to descend into an environment that had destroyed ships and submarines throughout history. The pilots were Vasquez and Kumar, both veterans of deep-water Kaiju engagements. Both understanding they were volunteering for a mission that had no precedent, no safety protocols, no guarantee of success or survival. You don't have to do this, Jake told them before deployment. Someone does, Vasquez said. Might as well be us. If anything happens down there, then we don't come back. We understand the stakes, sir. We watched Chen and Rodriguez die. If this thing comes back, their sacrifice means nothing. We're not letting that happen. November. Ajax entered the water at 0100 hours. The Jaeger's systems were designed for limited submersion, but the Mariana Trench was beyond those limits. Every meter deeper was a risk. Every increase in pressure was a gamble. Jake monitored from the surface vessel, watching telemetry data as November Ajax descended. 1,000 meters. 2,000. The pressure readings climbed steadily. The Jaeger's hull creaked under the stress, but held. 3,000 meters. 4,000. Communication became sporadic. The depth was interfering with signal transmission. The pilots' voices came through in fragments. Holding steady, pressure at acceptable. 5,000 meters. 6,000. They were entering the Hadal zone, the deepest parts of the ocean, where light had never reached and pressure measured in thousands of pounds per square inch. November Ajax status, Jake transmitted. Static. Then approaching. Floor, container. Secure. 7,000 meters. 8,000. The telemetry showed November Ajax nearing the trench floor. The deepest point. The place where the Earth's crust met mantle. Where pressure could crush steel like paper. Container release in 30 seconds. Vasquez's voice came through clearer now that they'd stopped descending. Jake watched the readouts. Watched the timer count down. Watched November Ajax prepare to release the fragment into darkness. 15 seconds. The temperature sensor on the container spiked from -70 to -65 in 2 seconds. Abort, Jake said. Bring it back. The fragment is activating. Negative Kumar's voice. We're committed. Container compromised. If we bring it back to the surface, it could breach in transit. Then drop it. Now. 10 seconds to scheduled release. I said drop it now. The telemetry showed container release. The fragment, still in its cryogenic housing, detached from November Ajax and began sinking. Down into the Hadal darkness. Down to pressures that exceeded anything they could create artificially. Fragment away, Vasquez reported, beginning ascent. Jake watched the container's descent. Its own telemetry showed temperatures still rising. -60, -55. Whatever exothermic reaction was occurring, it was accelerating. Then, the pressure readings took over. The container was designed for atmospheric pressure, maybe 20 atmospheres of water. At 8,000 meters, it was experiencing over 800 atmospheres. The housing imploded. Sudden. Total. The fragment inside was exposed directly to water at near freezing temperatures and pressure that would turn human tissue to paste. The telemetry went dead. Container destroyed, Jake reported. Fragment exposed to full trench conditions. Did it survive? Kwan's voice on the comm. Unknown. We've lost all sensor contact. The pressure is too extreme for our equipment to function. Then we wait. They waited. Hours, days. Monitoring equipment deployed at the trench rim. Seismic sensors watching for any sign of activity. Thermal satellites scanning for heat signatures that shouldn't exist at that depth. Nothing. November. Ajax returned to the surface after 36 hours of slow ascent. The Jaeger had sustained damage from the pressure. Micro-fractures in the hull, hydraulic systems stressed beyond specification. But functional. The pilots were treated for decompression complications, but expected to recover fully. The fragment remained at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, 7 miles down, surrounded by water at just above freezing, crushed under pressure that would destroy any known life form. And the sensors detected nothing. 3 weeks later, Jake stood in Marshal Kwan's office. Reports covered the desk, casualty lists, damage assessments, reconstruction timelines. The aftermath of a war that had lasted days but would cost years to recover from. The juveniles, he asked. We eliminated 4 using the lure protocol, Quan said. The 5th went dormant. We're still tracking it, but it's shown no aggressive behavior. Just survival, hiding. Do we leave it? We maintain surveillance. If it moves toward population centers, we respond. But hunting it through subsurface infrastructure has proven more expensive than it's worth. For now, we contain and monitor. And the fragment in the trench, no activity, no thermal signatures, no seismic events. By every measure, it's dead, or at least dormant to the point of being functionally irrelevant. You don't sound convinced. Quan looked at the reports, at the calculations of what they'd lost and what they'd saved. I'm not convinced of anything anymore. We're operating beyond known parameters, beyond science. We're guessing and hoping and praying that our guesses are right. But we're alive. Yes, we're alive, and we have protocols now. Thermal shock weapons, breach containment procedures, understanding of how precursor biology works. If it happens again, we'll be ready, if we're lucky. Luck is all we have left, Pentecost. Jake left the office, walked through PPDC headquarters, past memorials being constructed, past pilots who'd survived but carried scars that wouldn't show on medical scans, past scientists still analyzing tissue samples, searching for answers to questions they were only beginning to formulate. The war was over. Destoroyah was dead, or dormant, or waiting. The distinction had become meaningless. What mattered was that humanity had survived, had learned, had adapted. The same way the creature had, but slower. Always slower. He found himself at the memorial wall. Fresh names carved into stone. Chen, Rodriguez, 12 cadets, 3 technicians, 16 deaths. Not many compared to the Kaiju wars, but each one a universe extinguished. Each one a price paid for survival. Someone had left flowers. Fresh ones. Someone who remembered that statistics were made of people. Jake stood there for a long time. Not praying, not mourning. Just existing in the space between relief and dread. Between victory and the certainty that it was temporary. Somewhere 7 miles down in darkness, that had existed since the Earth was born, a fragment of Destoroyah lay crushed and frozen. Maybe dead. Probably dead. Almost certainly dead. But not certainly enough to sleep without dreams. Because the precursors were still out there. Still planning. Still sending seeds across the cosmos to terraform worlds into toxic wastelands suitable for their biology. Because Kaiju Blue still existed. In storage, in contamination sites, in places where catalysts could trigger awakening. Because somewhere in the subsurface darkness of a dying industrial city, a juvenile creature was hiding. Learning. Waiting for something that might never come. And because humanity had learned a fundamental truth that would shape every future engagement, they could win. At terrible cost. With sacrifices measured in lives and cities and futures, but they could win. The question wasn't whether they could survive the next threat. The question was how much they'd have to lose to do it. Jake touched the names on the memorial wall, made a silent promise to the dead that their sacrifice would matter, that the living would learn, would prepare, would be ready, and then he walked away. Back to duty. Back to training pilots who'd face tomorrow's monsters. Back to the endless work of building defenses against threats that evolved faster than understanding. The war was over, for now. But in the deep places of the ocean, where pressure crushed steel and darkness was absolute, something existed in a state between life and death. Frozen, dormant, waiting for conditions that might never come, or might come tomorrow. The universe, in its infinite indifference, kept no schedules, and humanity, in its desperate resilience, kept vigil, always watching, always preparing, always remembering that victory was just a pause between battles in a war that had no end. Only survivors and the stories they told to keep the next generation ready.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss out future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.